The blood was not supposed to reach the cuff before luncheon. Verity Althorne noticed the thin red line while she was counting the folded damask napkins in the linen room of Harrowden Hall, and for one dangerous second she simply stared at it as if it were an accusation written by her own body. The house was waking around her in its usual grand deception. Footmen crossed the passage with silver trays held high. Maids hurried past with coal scuttles, dusting cloths, and pale faces. Somewhere beyond the green baize door, where servants' breath and noble voices were meant never to meet, Lady Octavia Renshaw was already complaining that the roses in the breakfast room looked provincial. Harrowden Hall had survived bad harvests, unpaid bills, broken engagements, and 3 generations of Pembroke pride. It would not be allowed to falter because its housekeeper had been careless enough to bleed. Verity pressed the cuff tighter against her wrist and counted again. 12 napkins for luncheon, 24 for dinner. 4 extra in case Lady Maud Fenwick discovered a spot invisible to every eye but her own. Miss Althorne? A young maid stood in the doorway, twisting her apron. Mrs. Pike says the blue chamber needs more lavender water. Lady Fenwick says it smells of old curtains. Verity slid her hand beneath the ledger on the linen table before the girl could see the stain. Then Lady Fenwick shall have lavender water until the walls themselves grow purple, she said, calm as polished glass. Tell Mrs. Pike to use the smaller bottle from the locked cabinet, not the French one. The French bottle is for her Grace's rooms if the Dowager Duchess arrives. The maid gave a nervous little smile. You always know what matters. Verity looked at the girl's reddened fingers, chapped from lye soap and cold water. So must you, Annie. In a house like this, noticing is how one survives. The smile vanished because the girl understood. Everyone below stairs understood something had changed in the last month. Wages had come late, then short, then wrapped in explanations no one believed. Mr. Silas Vetch, steward to the Westmere estate, had begun locking the account room even during daylight. 2 kitchen maids had been dismissed without references. A stable boy who asked about his missing pay was sent away before dawn. Verity had not raised her voice. A housekeeper did not raise her voice. She had copied numbers in silence, tucked receipts into prayer books, asked questions softly, and watched Mr. Vetch begin to look at her not as a servant, but as a door he had not yet managed to bolt. She dismissed Annie with instructions for the blue chamber and reached for the narrow page hidden beneath the ledger. 3 columns of figures stared back at her. Servants' wages, recorded in Mr. Vetch's hand as paid in full. Actual wages, reported quietly by cook, Mrs. Pike, 2 footmen, and the scullery maid. Difference unaccounted for. The sum was not enormous by ducal standards. To a kitchen maid with a widowed mother, it was winter coal. To a footman with a younger brother apprenticed in York, it was a future. To Verity, it was proof that Harrowden Hall's order was rotting beneath the polish. She folded the page once, then twice, and slipped it inside the small prayer book she kept in her apron pocket, her sleeve pulled against the tender place on her forearm. She breathed in through her nose and waited until the pain became only another task. Pain could be managed. Disorder could not. By 9 o'clock, the great house had become a stage. Fires burned in rooms no one had yet entered. The marble hall smelled faintly of beeswax, rain-damp wool, and hothouse flowers forced to bloom out of season. Harrowden stood on a rise above the Yorkshire moors, stern and pale under a June sky that looked uncertain of its own mercy. Its windows watched the long drive. Its portraits watched the living with the exhausted superiority of the dead. Verity crossed the servants' passage with the ring of keys at her waist and a list in her hand. She was 27 years old, though fatigue and black bombazine made her appear older to those who did not bother to look twice. She wore her dark hair smooth beneath a plain cap. Her gown was neat, high-necked, and repaired so carefully no guest would see the mending. A housekeeper was expected to be respectable enough to command servants, invisible enough not to disturb guests, and grateful enough never to remember she had once been born above her present station. Verity remembered. Not often, not uselessly, but memory lived in small things. The way her father had once corrected her Latin pronunciation at a sunny breakfast table, the smell of sealing wax in his office, the silver watch he had sold 2 weeks before he died because respectable ruin was more expensive than honest poverty. Mr. Thomas Althorne had been solicitor to the parish trustees, a careful man with careful hands, until charity funds went missing, and his name was placed where guilt should have been. He had denied it only once. After that, he had grown quiet. Society did not need proof when disgrace suited its appetite. His daughter had entered service with good handwriting, a gentlewoman's education, and no protection left but usefulness. Miss Althorne. The voice came from the shadowed turn near the stillroom. Mr. Vetch stepped into the passage, his black coat brushed too carefully, his watch chain bright against his waistcoat. He had the look of a man who smiled only when someone else was cornered. "You have been busy this morning." "House parties create work, Mr. Vetch. So do unnecessary questions." Verity stopped, but did not step back. That small refusal changed his eyes. "If this concerns the lower servants' wages, I have already sent a note to your office requesting clarification." Clarification. He repeated the word as if it amused him. A dangerous habit, dressing suspicion in polite language. A useful habit when suspicion has figures beside it. His gaze dropped to her sleeve. Verity kept her arm still. The passage seemed to narrow. Somewhere behind them, pans clattered in the kitchen. Somewhere above, a lady laughed. "You would be wise to remember what happened the last time an Althorne involved herself with accounts," he said. The words were soft. That made them worse. Verity felt the old name strike where he intended it to strike, but she did not lower her eyes. "My father is dead, Mr. Vetch. You cannot frighten him." "No," he said, "but I can remind his daughter that a position in a ducal household is a mercy, not a birthright. Mercy that arrives short in the wage packets is a curious form of Christian virtue." His smile faded. For a moment, the house gave no sound at all. Then the sharp tap of a cane approached from the family corridor, and Mr. Vetch stepped aside at once. Lady Octavia Renshaw appeared beneath the archway in dove-grey silk, her widow's cap edged with lace fine enough to feed a scullery maid for a month. She was the late Duke's sister-in-law, dependent on Westmere generosity, though she carried dependence like a scepter. Her eyes moved over Verity with the slow displeasure one gave a stain on linen. "Why is the housekeeper standing idle in a passage?" "I was receiving instructions, my lady," Verity said. "Were you? How ambitious of you. I prefer my housekeepers to give instructions below stairs and disappear above them." Lady Octavia lifted one gloved hand, stopping just short of touching Verity's cuff. "You look pale. Not sentimental, I hope. Sentiment in servants always ends in broken china." Mr. Vetch lowered his head to hide satisfaction. Verity felt the warm line beneath her sleeve again and held herself still. "The household is prepared for the guests, my lady. Prepared is not excellent. The Duke of Westmere does not keep a house that is merely prepared." His Grace was not expected until tomorrow evening. His Grace is expected when he chooses to be expected. That is one of the privileges of being a duke. Lady Octavia's mouth curved. You would do well to remember the distance between those who own houses and those who carry keys in them. Verity's hand closed lightly around the key ring at her waist. It had been given to her by the previous housekeeper on a winter morning 3 years ago, when Verity was still learning which rooms were warmed for comfort and which for display. The keys had felt heavy then. Now they felt like duty. I remember it daily, my lady. See that you do. A housekeeper must be invisible, Miss Althorne. If guests begin noticing you, it will mean you have failed. Lady Octavia passed on, leaving the faint scent of violet powder and judgment behind her. Mr. Vetch lingered only long enough to say, "Some stains are best washed out before the master sees them." Then he followed her through the green baize door. Verity stood alone in the passage, with the household moving around her. For one breath, she wanted to sit down. Not cry. Crying would have required a sort of softness she could not afford before noon. She wanted only to sit, to loosen the cuff, to let the pain be ordinary. Instead, she went to the silver pantry, corrected the placement of 12 fish knives, sent a footman to polish the salver again, and told cook that Lady Maud preferred clear soup, though she would complain of being underfed by supper. The house obeyed her because she had earned obedience in 1,000 small rescues no guest would ever see. She had found shoes for maids whose soles split before Christmas. She had written references for servants dismissed by temper rather than fault. She had quietly paid for Annie's mother to receive broth from the village kitchen during fever season. If she could not restore her father's name, she could at least keep other powerless people from being crushed beneath names grander than theirs. Near 11 o'clock, she returned to the linen room and found the blood had marked the cuff after all. Not much, a narrow bloom, dark against white. She stared at it, then reached for a folded scrap of muslin to bind the sleeve tighter. Before she could fasten it, feet pounded along the servants' corridor. A young footman, breathless and wide-eyed, stopped at the threshold. "Miss Althorne," he swallowed. "His Grace has arrived before luncheon." Verity lowered her arm. The prayer book in her pocket seemed suddenly as heavy as iron. From beyond the green baize door came the deep roll of carriage wheels on gravel, the opening of the great front doors, and a shift in the very air of Harrowden Hall. The master of the house had come home early, and Verity, with blood at her cuff and stolen numbers against her heart, understood that by nightfall someone in that house would be exposed. Lucian Pembroke did not look like a man returning home. He looked like a judgment arriving in a black travelling coat. From the shadowed curve of the servants' passage, Verity saw only a narrow slice of the great hall. But it was enough. The front doors stood open to a wash of pale Yorkshire light. Rain gleamed on the shoulders of the footman who carried in the Duke's valises. The marble floor threw back the shape of a tall man removing his gloves with slow precision, as if even the weather had been an inconvenience he intended to correct. His hair was dark from the damp. His face was composed, handsome in a severe way, with no softness wasted on the cluster of servants bowing before him. He was not old, not young, and not easily read. That was the first thing Verity understood. The second was more dangerous. He noticed everything. His gaze passed over the hall, the flowers, the dustless banister, the footman whose left cuff had been poorly brushed, the missing second housemaid near the stair. And then, for one brief instant, the green baize door where Verity stood half hidden. She stepped back before his eyes could settle on her sleeve. The movement pulled at the tender skin beneath the cuff, and she closed her hand around the prayer book in her apron pocket. The copied ledger page seemed to burn through the cover. "His Grace will take luncheon in the library," Lady Octavia announced from the family side of the hall, her voice carrying with the bright confidence of a woman who had never carried a coal scuttle in her life. "Miss Althorne, see that the servants do not run about like frightened chickens. Harrowden has entertained dukes before." Verity came forward just far enough to curtsy. "Yes, my lady." Lucian turned toward her then, not fully, only enough that the air felt suddenly measured. "Miss Althorne." His voice was low, controlled, and unexpectedly clear. "Housekeeper to Harrowden Hall, Your Grace." "How long have you held the position?" 3 years, Your Grace. And before that?" Lady Octavia gave a little laugh. "Surely, Lucian, you do not mean to interview the housekeeper in the hall after travelling 30 miles. "I asked a question, Aunt." The hall quieted. Verity felt every servant listening without appearing to listen. She also felt Mr. Vetch somewhere behind her, unseen but present, like a draught under a locked door. "I served as assistant housekeeper under Mrs. Greaves for 1 year before taking the post, Your Grace." That is not an answer to before that. The question was not cruel. That made it harder. Verity lifted her chin by the smallest degree. "Before that, I was Miss Verity Althorne of Little Cresswell, daughter of Mr. Thomas Althorne." A shadow moved behind Lucian's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "I knew the name. Most people did, Your Grace." Lady Octavia's cane tapped once against the marble. "Luncheon, Miss Althorne." The dismissal fell like a curtain. Verity curtsied again and withdrew. She had crossed only 6 yards of passage before Mr. Vetch appeared beside the still-room door. His smile held no warmth, a touching resurrection of old dignity. "The soup will cool, Mr. Vetch. Names do not stay buried when people keep digging, nor do accounts." His eyes sharpened. "Take care tonight, Miss Althorne. A dinner table is a poor place for a servant to be remembered." Verity moved past him without answering. She had learned long ago that silence could be mistaken for submission by those too vain to recognize discipline. By 7 o'clock, Harrowden Hall blazed as if no unquiet thing had ever crossed its threshold. Chandeliers shone over gilt cornices. The long dining room glowed with candles set in silver branches, and the table stretched beneath white linen, cut crystal, and porcelain painted with the Westmere crest. Outside the tall windows, rain stitched silver lines against the dark. Inside, the county guests gathered with polished smiles and sharpened curiosity. Lady Maud Fenwick sat near the Duke in pale blue silk, her golden hair arranged with artful innocence. She had the manner of a woman who believed every room improved when it turned toward her. Lady Octavia held the opposite end of the table with widowly command, correcting servants with glances delicate enough to be deniable. Verity had intended not to enter the dining room at all. A housekeeper supervised from the threshold, sent footmen forward, corrected mistakes below the level of notice. Then Annie, pale with fear, placed the wrong sauce beside the turbot. Lady Maud looked down and smiled as though a crown jewel had been replaced with mud. "How unusual," she said lightly. "Does Harrowden often serve mutton sauce with fish?" The young footman froze. Annie went white. Lady Octavia's gaze lifted at once toward the doorway. "Miss Althorne." Verity stepped forward before the maid could be sacrificed. "The error is mine, my lady. It was not, but ownership cost less than letting the girl be dismissed before dessert. I beg your pardon. She signaled the footman to remove the dish and replace it. The correction took less than 10 seconds. The silence lasted longer. Lady Maud tilted her head. How brave of the housekeeper to confess so publicly. A few guests smiled, not kindly. Verity curtsied. Accuracy is less brave than necessary, my lady. The Duke's knife paused above his plate. Verity did not look at him. She could not afford to. Lady Octavia's eyes narrowed. Necessary is a word servants learn after humility. Yes, my lady. Verity stepped back. Her sleeve brushed the carved back of Lady Octavia's chair as she turned. The cuff had loosened where she had bound it in haste. She felt the cloth shift, then catch. One moment, Lady Octavia said, reaching out as if to stop her only by courtesy. Her gloved fingers closed near Verity's wrist. The widow's ring, a square-cut garnet edged in tiny claws of gold, hooked into the mended cuff. Verity felt the snag before she heard the tear. It was a small sound, barely more than a whisper of thread surrendering. Yet the dining room seemed to hear it all at once. White linen split from the wrist toward the forearm, opening the sleeve, wide enough to reveal the bandage beneath, the bruise at its edge, and the dark red mark spreading through cloth that had failed to hold. Annie made a soft sound by the sideboard. A guest inhaled. Lady Maud's smile vanished, then returned thinner. Lady Octavia released the fabric as if it had offended her. Good heavens, Miss Althorne, what an unfortunate display. Verity lowered her arm, but it was too late. The blood had become visible, not dramatic, not enough to cause alarm in itself, enough to prove concealment, enough to invite judgment. Forgive me, my lady, she said, and hated the steadiness of her own voice, because it sounded almost like surrender. I will withdraw. You should have done so before bringing such unpleasantness to table. Lady Octavia's tone remained soft. That made it sharper. Servants with injuries ought not parade them before guests. Verity's hand tightened around the torn fabric. Then the chair at the head of the table moved, not loudly, not abruptly, yet every eye turned because the Duke of Westmere had risen. Lucian crossed the room with a stillness more alarming than haste. He did not look at Lady Octavia first. He looked at Verity's arm, then at the torn cuff, then at the garnet ring on his aunt's hand. When he reached Verity, he stopped at a distance proper enough for society, and close enough that his voice needed no force. Miss Althorne, may I see your wrist? The question struck the room differently from any command would have done. Verity looked up before she could prevent herself. His eyes were grey, not cold exactly, but disciplined beyond comfort. There was anger in them. It was not aimed at her. Your Grace, it is nothing. Nothing does not bleed through linen. Lady Octavia gave a brittle laugh. Lucian, really. She has embarrassed herself enough. The Duke did not turn. Aunt, you will be silent for a moment. The words were quiet. The room obeyed them. Verity felt the world narrow to the space between his gloved hand and her torn sleeve. You need not touch it, Your Grace, she said. I can send for a fresh cuff. I am not concerned with the cuff. He removed a clean handkerchief from his coat pocket. May I? It was the second time he had asked permission. Something in Verity, trained by years to expect handling rather than courtesy, nearly broke under the gentleness of that formality. She gave the smallest nod. He wrapped the handkerchief around the torn sleeve without brushing her skin. His fingers were careful. His face changed only once, when the cloth passed over the older bruise. The change was slight, but Lady Octavia saw it. So did Vetch, standing near the service door, with his expression locked in place. Send for Dr. Pritchard, Lucian said, and Mrs. Vale. Miss Althorne will be examined with a female witness present." "Examined?" Lady Maud said faintly, as if the word itself were distasteful. "At dinner?" "Yes," Lucian said, "because the injury is here at dinner." Lady Octavia's voice cooled. "You risk turning a servant's clumsiness into a spectacle." Lucian turned at last. The room seemed to lose breath. The spectacle began when a woman bled at my table, and half the room found manners more urgent than mercy. No one spoke. Verity looked down because she feared what her face might reveal. Relief was dangerous. Gratitude was worse. Hope in a house like Harrowden could be fatal if shown too early. Lucian faced Mr. Vetch near the doorway. "Until I have heard the truth, no servant in this house will be dismissed, questioned, or blamed." Mr. Vetch bowed. "Of course, Your Grace." His voice was smooth, but his eyes flicked once to Verity's pocket. Lucian noticed. Verity knew he noticed, because his gaze moved there as well. Brief and exact, the prayer book lay hidden beneath her apron, holding numbers that could undo more than a dinner. "Miss Althorne," the Duke said. "Softer now. Can you walk?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Then you will come no farther than the housekeeper's parlour. Mrs. Vale will attend you. Dr. Pritchard will see the injury. After that, we will discuss how long this wound has been hidden in my house." The words settled over the table like a sealed letter. Verity curtsied, because her body remembered duty even when her life had begun to tilt. As she turned toward the servant's door, the torn sleeve brushed against the Duke's handkerchief, staining its white edge red. Behind her, Lady Octavia said nothing. Mr. Vetch said nothing, but silence had a shape, and this one had teeth. Verity crossed the threshold beneath the green baize door, with the Duke's footsteps following at a proper distance. And for the first time since her father's disgrace, she wondered whether being seen might prove more dangerous than being invisible. The housekeeper's parlour had never felt so small. Verity had stood in that room through broken china, dismissed maids, influenza fevers, quarrels over wages, and one winter, when the pipes froze so hard the maids carried kettles upstairs for 4 days. Yet she had never before entered it with a Duke behind her and blood darkening a handkerchief that cost more than her Sunday shoes. Mrs. Vale arrived first, breathless but composed, her grey hair pinned with the severity of a woman who had survived 30 years in service by noticing danger before it spoke. She looked once at Verity's sleeve, once at the Duke, then shut the door with a firmness that restored some order to the world. "Sit down, Miss Althorne," she said. "You're white as flour." "I am, quite well." "Then sit down and be quite well in the chair." Lucian Pembroke remained near the mantel, far enough from Verity to satisfy propriety, close enough that his presence altered the room. He had not removed his evening coat. Candlelight touched the rain, still drying at his collar, the hard line of his jaw, and the hand he kept loosely at his side, as if restraint were a discipline he practiced even with his fingers. Verity sat, because refusing would make everyone look longer. The chair was plain oak, polished by generations of housekeepers who had carried the estate on straight backs and tired feet. Across from her, the small table held the account slate, a basket of mending, and the prayer book she had slipped from her apron pocket the moment she entered. She had placed it beneath a stack of household menus with what she hoped was ordinary care. The copied ledger page lay inside it. If Mr. Vetch entered this room and touched that book, all her caution would become ashes. Dr. Elias Pritchard came in smelling faintly of wet wool, saddle leather, and camphor. He was a broad, mild man with silver at his temples and eyes kind enough to invite foolish confidences. Verity trusted him less for that reason. Kindness could become pity when offered by those with nothing to lose. He bowed to the Duke, nodded to Mrs. Vale, then turned to Verity. "Well, Miss Althorne, let's have a look, shall we?" "It is only a torn sleeve, Doctor." "A torn sleeve rarely requires a physician." Lucian's voice came from the mantel. Dr. Pritchard glanced at him, then back at Verity. "May I loosen the cloth?" Verity almost smiled at the repetition of courtesy. Men in power had spent much of her life taking papers, rooms, names, and choices without asking. Tonight, 2 of them had asked permission to touch a sleeve. "Yes, Doctor." Mrs. Vale moved to stand beside her, blocking the window, so no passing servant could glance in, Doctor. Pritchard unwound the Duke's handkerchief carefully. The white linen had taken a narrow stain along one edge. Verity kept her eyes on the coal fire. When the torn cuff fell back, the room grew quiet. The fresh scrape was not severe, but the bruise beneath it had deepened toward purple, shaped too much like fingers to be mistaken by anyone who wished to tell the truth. "Doctor?" Pritchard's mouth tightened. "When did this occur?" "This afternoon." "How?" "The linen room shelf has a rough edge." Mrs. Vale looked at her. Verity did not look back. Lucian did not move. That was worse than if he had questioned her at once. Stillness made him difficult to evade. Dr. Pritchard cleaned the scrape with warm water and a folded cloth. It stung enough that Verity's breath caught. She turned the sound into a cough. "A rough shelf made this?" the doctor asked. "I caught my arm while reaching for napkins, and the bruise, the same shelf." Lucian stepped 1 pace closer. The boards did not creak beneath him. "Does the shelf have fingers, Miss Althorne?" The question was quiet. Mrs. Vale inhaled sharply. Dr. Pritchard kept his eyes on the bandage, which was kind of him. Verity met the Duke's gaze, because lowering hers would have been easier, and she had promised herself long ago not to choose ease when truth was watching. "Old houses have many hazards, Your Grace. So do silent answers. Silence is sometimes less hazardous than speech." A small change passed over his face. Not surprise, recognition. He understood caution. Perhaps he practiced it himself in grander rooms. "Are you afraid of someone in this house?" he asked. Mrs. Vale's hand tightened on the back of Verity's chair. The fire gave a soft collapse of coal. Verity thought of Annie's pale face, of the dismissed maids without references, of the stable boy sent away before dawn, of wages shortened by hands that had never scrubbed a stair. She thought of her father standing before parish trustees with his hat in both hands, while men who had dined at his table decided his honesty was inconvenient. "I am responsible for several people in this house," she said. "That is not the answer I asked for. It is the answer I can give." Dr. Pritchard began wrapping a clean bandage around her forearm. His touch was practiced and gentle. "The wound itself will heal, Your Grace. The bruise is older by some days. I cannot say more than that without Miss Althorne's account." "Then we shall have her account when she is ready to give it." Lucian looked toward the door. "Is Mr. Vetch outside?" Mrs. Vale crossed to the door and opened it before Verity could stop her. Mr. Vetch stood in the passage, with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression arranged into concern. He did not look embarrassed to have been found listening. Men like Mr. Vetch rarely did. "Your Grace," he said, bowing, "I came to inquire whether Miss Althorne required any assistance from the household." "How thoughtful," Lucian said. The words were polite enough to be dangerous. "You told me she injured herself in the linen room." "So I was informed, Your Grace." "By whom?" "I could not say at this moment. There was some confusion." "Confusion has become an industrious servant at Harrowden tonight." Vetch's smile remained in place. Miss Althorne is devoted, but she has been under strain. House parties unsettle the lower staff. Do they? A woman in her position may overextend herself. Verity heard the trap, her position, her strain, her lower staff. Each phrase laid a soft path toward dismissal without accusation. Lucian heard it too. His eyes remained on Vetch, but his next words were for the whole room. Until I say otherwise, all household discipline involving Miss Althorne, the maids, footmen, kitchen staff, or wage matters will come through me. Vetch's smile faltered by the width of a thread. That is a considerable burden for your grace. I have carried heavier ones. Of course, the account room will remain locked tonight. Tomorrow morning, you will bring the wage ledgers to my study. The ledgers, your grace? Yes, the ones that show what has been paid, and the ones that explain what has not. Verity lowered her eyes before Vetch saw hope in them. Hope was evidence, too, in the wrong hands. He bowed again, more stiffly. As your grace commands. As he withdrew, his gaze moved once across the parlor. It touched the mending basket, the menus, the prayer book beneath them. Verity's heart struck hard against her ribs. Lucian turned his head, following that glance with unnerving accuracy. For a moment, no one spoke. Dr. Pritchard tied the final knot in the bandage. Keep it clean. No heavy lifting tonight. No carrying trays, no reaching above shoulder height. Doctor, I manage the dinner service. Not tonight, you don't, Mrs. Vale said. Verity almost protested, but Lucian spoke first. Mrs. Vale, see that Miss Althorne's duties are distributed. No maid is to be punished for any delay caused by this. The old servant looked at him with cautious approval. Yes, your grace. Dr. Pritchard packed his case and took the stained cloths with him. Mrs. Vale followed to Yane's hot water and a fresh cuff, leaving the door half open for propriety. Verity rose at once, too quickly. Pain flashed up her arm. She steadied herself on the table. The menus shifted. The edge of the prayer book appeared. Lucian saw it. He also saw the dark smear across the torn cuff where the blood had dried unevenly. He stepped nearer but stopped before he crossed the line between concern and impropriety. Miss Althorne, your grace. That mark beneath the blood is not from the dining room. She looked down. Black ink lay along the torn linen, worked deep into the threads near the rip. Ledger ink. Estate office ink. Not sauce, not soot, not linen room dust. Ink travels easily in a working house, she said. Not to the underside of a torn cuff. His voice softened, and somehow that made it harder to breathe. You are protecting someone. Yes. The truth escaped before she could dress it in caution. His eyes held hers. Yourself. Verity thought of the prayer book. She thought of the figures inside it. The unpaid servants. The old accusation against her father. And Mr. Vetch's smile as he warned her what happened to Althorners who asked questions. No, your grace, she said at last. Not only myself. The admission changed the room. It did not make it safer. It made it honest. From the passage beyond the half-open door came the muted rhythm of a household, pretending dinner had not been wounded. Lucian looked at the ink again, then at the hidden book beneath the menus, but he did not reach for it. He had the power to demand it. He chose not to. Then tomorrow, he said. Verity folded her uninjured hand over the prayer book before he could see the tremor in her fingers. For the first time in years, someone powerful had noticed the right stain. That did not mean she was saved. It meant the danger had finally found a witness. By breakfast, the blood on the Duke's handkerchief had traveled farther through Harrowden Hall than any guest could have carried it. It moved in whispers beneath doors, over trays, through the servants' stair, and along the polished corridors where ladies pretended not to listen. Verity learned this before she finished. Tying a fresh cuff over the bandage, Dr. Pritchard had ordered her not to disturb. Annie would not meet her eyes while laying out the morning linen. The second footman nearly dropped a tray when she entered the still-room. Even cook, who considered gossip a lesser sin than under-seasoned broth, stopped beating eggs long enough to say, "You should have stayed obeyed, Miss Althorne." "The house has 32 guests expected for luncheon, Mrs. Bramley. It would take more than a bandage to keep me idle." "It shouldn't." "No, but it does." The words came out softer than she intended. Cook looked at her then, not with pity, which Verity would have refused, but with a troubled loyalty that was harder to bear. "Annie's crying in the scullery. Says it was her sauce mistake that put you in the dining room." Verity closed her eyes for 1 second. "Then tell her, if she wastes good tears on imagined guilt, I shall assign her to polishing brass until Michaelmas." Cook snorted. "That'll set her right." It did not set anything right, of course. It merely kept the girl from becoming another casualty of a house that preferred blame to truth. Verity crossed the kitchen passage with the day's schedule in her hand, and the prayer book returned safely to her apron pocket. Every step tugged at the bandage. Every nod from a servant asked the same silent question. What did the Duke know? Verity had no answer. At 9:30, she reached the green baize door and heard Lady Maud Fenwick laughing in the morning room beyond it. The sound was bright, trained, and merciless. "I do admire devotion in servants," Lady Maud said, "but one hopes it need not become theatrical. A little blood at dinner, and suddenly every maid in Yorkshire imagines herself a martyr." A gentleman murmured something Verity could not hear. Lady Maud continued, "Of course, His Grace is generous. That is one of his finest qualities. One must only hope generosity is not mistaken by the lower orders for personal interest." Verity kept her hand on the door until her fingers no longer tightened. She had lived long enough in grand houses to know the cruelty of almost an insult, almost a warning, almost a scandal, dressed so prettily that anyone who objected appeared vulgar. Lady Octavia's voice followed, smooth as folded silk. "Lucian has always been inclined to correct disorder sharply once he perceives it. Miss Althorne will be restored to her proper duties soon enough, provided she remembers them. And provided she does not bleed on any more linen," Lady Maud said. Soft laughter answered. Verity opened the door with a tray list in her hand, because entering with purpose was better than being discovered with a wounded heart. The morning room held Lady Maud, 2 county ladies, the Reverend Mr. Bellamy's wife, and Lady Octavia seated near the window with her cane across her knees. Sunlight lay over the carpet in pale rectangles. Tea steamed in porcelain cups. No one looked surprised to see her. That was how Verity knew they had expected her to hear. "Miss Althorne," Lady Octavia said, "how brave of you to appear." Verity curtsied. "The household requires management, my lady. A pity the household did not manage itself better last night." Lady Maud lifted her cup. "You are recovered, then?" "Quite sufficiently, my lady." "How fortunate. Some women grow interesting only when injured. It must be exhausting to maintain." The words hung in the air, delicate and poisonous. Verity saw Mrs. Bellamy look down at her tea. She saw one county lady hide a smile behind her napkin. She saw Lady Octavia watching for the smallest crack. Verity gave none. "If my lady requires additional hot water, I shall send it." Lady Maud's smile sharpened. "What I require is not to be made uneasy at breakfast by household disturbances." Then I shall ensure breakfast remains undisturbed. Can you ensure yourself the same? Lady Octavia asked. Miss Althorne, you will remember that the Duke's attention last night was a matter of duty, not distinction. Verity felt the words land exactly where intended. Duty could protect, distinction could ruin. I remember my place, my lady. A new voice came from the doorway. Do you? Lucian Pembroke stood just inside the room, dressed in dark morning coat and grey waistcoat, his expression unreadable. The ladies shifted at once. Lady Maud's smile bloomed as if the sun had finally entered. Lady Octavia straightened. Verity lowered her gaze because servants did not stare at dukes in morning rooms, even when dukes had just turned a quiet insult into a question. Your Grace, she said. You said you remember your place. Lucian continued. Tell me what place that is. The room went still. Verity knew better than to answer honestly. My place is where the keys are heavy enough to bruise. My place is between the frightened and those who enjoy frightening them. My place is beneath notice until someone needs blame, she said only. Wherever the household requires me, your grace. Something moved through his face, quick and restrained. Approval, perhaps, or anger on her behalf, which was more dangerous than either. Lady Octavia gave a small laugh. A neat answer. Miss Althorne has always been clever with phrases. Cleverness is useful in a house this size, Lucian said. So is honesty. Naturally, Lady Octavia replied, which is why I hope this little disturbance will not encourage sentiment below stairs. Lucian turned to her. I have ordered the duplicate wage ledgers brought to my study after luncheon. The morning room changed. It was slight, but Verity felt it. Lady Maud's cup paused halfway to its saucer. Mrs. Bellamy looked up. Lady Octavia's fingers rested more firmly on her cane. Ledgers? Lady Octavia said. Surely you do not intend to spend your first day home troubling yourself with servants' accounts. If servants' accounts trouble my housekeeper enough to draw warnings from my steward, they may trouble me. Verity kept her face still. Mr. Vetch had been right about one thing. Questions carried danger. Answered questions carried more. Lady Maud recovered first. How admirable, though I confess I cannot imagine a duke bent over wage columns when he has guests in the house. No, Lucian said. I imagine you cannot. The cut was quiet. Lady Maud's colour rose. Verity wished, unreasonably, that he had not defended the matter so openly. Protection could become a lantern held over her head. Every cruel eye now knew where to look. Lucian's gaze returned to her. Miss Althorne, Mrs. Vale will assist you today. Any instruction formally taken to Mr. Vetch concerning wages, schedules, or household discipline will come directly to me until further notice. Lady Octavia's voice cooled. Lucian, that is highly irregular. So was last night. A servant's injury hardly justifies overturning the order of a ducal household. It revealed enough disorder to make me curious. Curiosity is seldom dignified. Concealment is worse. The words struck the room flat. No one laughed now. Verity curtsied, though the motion pulled at her arm. I shall inform Mrs. Vale, your grace. Do so, and Miss Althorne. She stopped. You need not earn your safety in this house. For one suspended moment, she could not breathe correctly. The sentence was simple. It should have been impossible to misunderstand. Yet Verity had spent years earning everything. Shelter, wages, respect. Silence, even survival seemed to demand daily proof of usefulness. Safety given freely sounded less like kindness than an unfamiliar language. Lady Octavia looked at her with narrowed eyes. Verity lowered hers at once. Thank you, your grace. She left before gratitude showed too plainly. In the passage, the air felt cooler. Annie waited by the still-room door, twisting a towel. "Miss Althorne," I heard Lady Maud. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this. You did not bring Mr. Vetch's ledgers into question. You did not tear my sleeve. You did not speak cruelly over tea. But if I hadn't made the source mistake, then some other mistake would have served." Verity touched the girl's shoulder with her uninjured hand. "Listen to me. No girl loses her place today because a lady wanted someone to blame." Annie's eyes filled. "You're kind, miss." "No, I am practical. Kindness lasts longer when one keeps records." The girl gave a watery laugh and hurried away. Verity stood alone by the passage window. Outside, the gravel drive curved beneath dripping trees, and carriages began arriving for the afternoon callers who had heard enough of last night to be curious. Harrowden was already opening its doors to more eyes, more whispers, more polished mouths. Above her, in some bright chamber, Lady Maud was likely turning blood into entertainment. Behind her, Mr. Vetch would be calculating how quickly evidence could disappear before luncheon, and in the Duke's study, duplicate ledgers would soon be placed on a desk that had seen treaties, marriage settlements, and family secrets sealed in wax. Verity pressed her hand to the prayer book in her pocket. Her father's name waited inside those numbers like a candle sheltered from wind. For the first time, someone with power had asked to see the shadows around it. That should have comforted her. Instead, as a footman rushed past to announce another guest, and the house stirred toward spectacle, Verity understood that the Duke's protection had not ended her danger. It had made her visible to everyone who needed her gone. By late morning, the first true blow landed. Lady Maud's maid came down the servants' stair, pale and breathless, clutching an empty velvet case. "Miss Althorne," she whispered, "my lady's pearl brooch is missing." The missing brooch changed the temperature of the house. It was not only a jewel, though Lady Maud Fenwick described it as if a crown had been stolen from her pillow. It was a pearl brooch set in old gold, a gift from a godmother with a title long enough to make theft sound almost treasonous. Within 10 minutes, the servants' corridor had lost its ordinary rhythm. Footmen stopped carrying trays halfway down the passage. Maids clutched folded sheets as if linen might be called to testify. Cook stood in the kitchen doorway, with flour on her hands and fury in her eyes. Verity listened to Lady Maud's maid repeat the story and felt the trap closing with the quiet neatness of a drawer being locked. "When did your lady last see it?" she asked. The maid, a narrow girl named Sissy, twisted the empty velvet case between her fingers. "Before breakfast, miss. She wore it with the blue morning gown, then changed her mind because Lady Octavia said pearls were too soft for yellow silk. I laid it on the dressing table. I'm certain I did. Who entered the room after that?" "Only me, miss, and Mrs. Pike with fresh water, and Lady Octavia for a moment. Then Lady Maud rang, and it was gone." Sissy's voice cracked. "She says if it isn't found, she'll send me away without a character. No one will be sent away without inquiry." Verity spoke more firmly than she felt. Her arm ached beneath the clean cuff. The prayer book in her apron pocket pressed against her side, holding evidence of a theft far greater than pearls. "Go back upstairs. Touch nothing else. Tell Mrs. Pike I am coming." "Mr. Vetch is already there," Sissy whispered. Of course he was. Verity took the back stairs rather than the main passage, because it gave her 20 additional seconds to think. By the time she reached Lady Maud's chamber, the room was already full of the wrong people. Lady Maud stood near the dressing table in pale yellow silk, one hand resting dramatically at her throat. Lady Octavia sat by the window, with her cane across her knees. Mr. Vetch stood near the wardrobe, grave as a churchwarden at a funeral he had arranged. Mrs. Pike, the lady's maid, looked ready to faint. Lucian Pembroke stood by the mantel. He had not yet spoken. That silence mattered. It kept the room from becoming entirely theirs. Lady Maud turned when Verity entered. "Ah, Miss Althorne, perhaps now we shall have some competence." Verity curtsied. "I understand your brooch is missing, my lady." Missing is what one says when a glove slips behind a cushion. "My pearl brooch has been taken." "That's a strong word," Lucian said. Lady Maud's lashes fluttered. "Surely your grace does not expect me to believe pearls walk away from a dressing table. I expect evidence before accusation." Lady Octavia made a soft sound. "Admirable, Lucian. But evidence must be sought where theft has access." Mr. Vetch bowed slightly. "If your grace permits, I advise a prompt search of the servants' rooms. Delay gives opportunity for concealment." The words fell with practiced reason. Verity felt the servants behind her, unseen but present in every frightened breath along the corridor. A search could be made to look proper and still destroy reputations. A ribbon placed in a trunk, a coin dropped beneath a mattress, a brooch hidden in a drawer. Her mind stopped there for one beat. A drawer, a locked drawer. "If there is to be a search, your grace," she said, "it should be witnessed and recorded." Mr. Vetch's gaze shifted toward her. "How careful! Care is not guilt." "No one suggested that, Miss Althorne." "Not yet." The room went still. Lady Octavia's mouth thinned. Lady Maud gave a small laugh, delighted by discomfort now that it belonged to someone else. Lucian looked at Verity, and she saw the question in his face. "Are you certain?" She was not, but certainty was a luxury. Procedure was the best defense left to those without power. "Miss Althorne is correct," he said. "No servant's room will be searched without witnesses. Mr. Vetch, Mrs. Vale will attend. Mrs. Pike will remain for Lady Maud. I will be present." Lady Octavia sat forward. "You cannot intend to parade through servants' chambers yourself. I do not intend to let fear do the work of justice." "Justice?" Lady Maud repeated. "Your grace, it's my brooch." "Then you should wish it found cleanly." The search began upstairs, where it should have remained. Drawers were opened, boxes inspected, bed hangings lifted. Sissy sobbed once when her trunk was examined, and Verity made the inventory herself, so Mr. Vetch could not describe poverty as suspicion. Nothing was found. They moved below stairs. Mrs. Vale walked beside Verity, stern and watchful. Mr. Vetch carried the composure of a man who already knew the ending. When they reached the small workroom beside the linen room, Verity felt cold gather beneath her ribs. This was not a sleeping chamber. It was her place of order. A narrow desk, a locked drawer for household lists, spare keys to linen presses, thread, sealing wafers, receipts, and the small private dignity of things placed where she had chosen. Mr. Vetch paused at the threshold. "Perhaps unnecessary, your grace. Miss Althorne's drawer is kept locked." "Then it will be opened with her consent," Lucian said. Every eye turned to Verity. She could refuse and look guilty. She could agree and step willingly toward whatever waited. Her father's name rose in memory, not as scandal but as instruction. If they make a room into a court, stand straight in it. She unfastened the key ring from her waist. The metal felt heavier than usual. "Search it properly, your grace, not cruelly." Something in Lucian's face changed, not softness. "You have my word." She placed the small brass key in his hand. Their gloves did not touch, but the moment passed through her with humiliating force. It was not romance. Not then. It was the shock of being believed capable of dignity while standing under suspicion. Lucian opened the drawer. At first there was only order. Folded lists, a roll of black thread, sealing wafers, a small packet of lavender to keep away damp. Then the velvet gleamed from beneath a stack of old menus. Lady Maud gasped before anyone touched it. "Mrs." Pike whispered. "Oh, mercy." Verity did not move. Lucian lifted the case, opened it, and revealed the pearl brooch inside. The pearls shone with quiet innocence, which made the room feel worse. "Well," Lady Octavia said. The word was almost gentle. "Blood and theft do travel close together, it seems." Verity heard Annie's small cry from the passage. She heard Mrs. Vale say the girl's name sharply. She heard Mr. Vetch breathe out, barely, as if a wager had turned in his favor. But she did not plead. She would not give them that shape of satisfaction. "That was not in my drawer when I locked it this morning," she said. Lady Maud touched her throat. "I'm sure every thief says something of the sort. My lady, I have served in this house for 4 years and held its keys for 3. "Yes," Lady Octavia said. "Access does simplify temptation." Lucian still held the brooch case. He had not given it to Lady Maud. Verity noticed. So did Vetch. "Who else has a key to this drawer?" the Duke asked. "No one, Your Grace," Verity said. "The key remains on my ring." Mr. Vetch spread his hands. Then the explanation appears plain. Plain explanations are often designed for people too eager to stop looking. Lucian turned the small brass key in his fingers. Was the lock forced? He knelt enough to inspect it, heedless of the startled silence caused by a duke lowering himself before a housekeeper's desk. No scratches, no splintering. It opened cleanly. Vetch's smile faded. "Servants are skilled with keys, Your Grace." "Are stewards?" The question struck harder because it was quiet. Lady Octavia's cane tapped once. "Lucian, this is becoming absurd." "The item was found where it was found, yes. In a locked drawer that appears to have been opened without damage." He rose. "Miss Althorne, where are duplicate household keys kept?" Verity looked at him, then at Mr. Vetch. She understood the cost of the answer before she gave it. Once spoken, it could not be folded away like the ledger page in her prayer book. It would make the trap visible, and visible traps were the most dangerous kind. "With Mr. Vetch, Your Grace." The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Vetch gave a soft laugh. "For estate necessity. Surely Miss Althorne doesn't suggest I placed a lady's jewel in her drawer." "Miss Althorne suggested nothing," Lucian said. "She answered me." Lady Maud's voice sharpened. "Your Grace, you cannot mean to place my word beside a servant's." Lucian closed the velvet case. The snap sounded small and final. "At present, my lady, I am placing evidence beside convenience. They are not the same." Verity felt the room tilt again, but this time she did not sway. She watched Lucian tuck the brooch case under his arm instead of returning it. She watched Vetch's gaze flick to her apron pocket, then away. She watched Lady Octavia study the fresh cuff over Verity's bandage as if planning where next to press. "This matter is not concluded," Lucian said. "No one is dismissed. No one is sent for a magistrate. No one leaves Harrowden with a ruined name because a jewel appeared exactly where suspicion wished to find it." For a single breath, Verity allowed herself to feel the strength of those words. Then Lady Octavia rose very slowly, and her smile returned. "How noble! Then perhaps, Lucian, the family and our guests deserve to hear your reasoning before luncheon. If Miss Althorne is innocent, surely she will not object to being questioned in the drawing room." Verity's bandaged arm pulsed beneath her sleeve. The brooch had been found. The accusation had been staged. And now the room of private evidence was being turned toward public shame. The drawing-room had been arranged as if accusation were a form of entertainment. Lady Octavia did not call it an inquiry. That would have sounded too earnest, too close to justice. She called it a necessary clarification. And by the time the clock struck 12, necessary clarification had filled the blue drawing-room with guests who had no business hearing a servant's name spoken at all. 2 county ladies sat near the window with embroidery. They were not stitching. The Reverend Mr. Bellamy stood near the pianoforte, uneasy and useless. Lady Maud Fenwick occupied the striped silk settee as though personal grief had been designed to flatter her complexion. Mr. Vetch waited by the writing table with a leather folio tucked beneath one arm. Lady Octavia sat beside the hearth, cane upright between her gloved hands, her face composed into wounded duty. At the center of the room stood Verity Althorne in her plain black gown, her fresh cuff hiding the bandage beneath it, and her keys still at her waist because no one had yet taken them from her. That small fact kept her breathing. A woman with keys still had a charge. A woman with a charge could stand. Lucian Pembroke stood near the mantel with the pearl brooch case in his hand. He had placed himself neither beside Verity nor beside his aunt, which was proper. It was also terrible. Verity understood propriety. She had been wounded by it often enough to know its shape. This need not be unpleasant, Lady Octavia said, which meant she intended it to be precise. Miss Althorne has an opportunity to explain how Lady Maud's brooch came to rest in her locked drawer. Verity curtsied. I cannot explain what I did not do, my lady. Lady Maud's lashes lowered. How convenient. Truth often is not convenient, my lady. That is why people avoid it. A murmur moved through the room. Lucian looked at her then, sharply, not displeased, warned. She had spoken too much, like the gentlewoman she had once been, and not enough like the servant they wished to question. Lady Octavia smiled. There, you see the tone. I have always found Miss Althorne unusually assured for a housekeeper. Competence can be mistaken for insolence by those who require trembling, Lucian said. The murmur died. Lady Octavia's fingers tightened on her cane. Lucian, we all admire generosity, but generosity must not become blindness. Then let us remain sighted. He opened the velvet case and set it on the table. The pearls caught the pale light from the windows. The brooch was found in Miss Althorne's drawer. The drawer was locked. The lock was unmarked. The duplicate keys are held by Mr. Vetch. For proper estate management, Vetch said smoothly. I have held them for years without complaint. So noted, Your Grace, Lady Maud said, leaning forward. I don't wish to be cruel. Truly, I don't. But if a jewel is found hidden among a servant's private things, must we pretend the matter is obscure because the servant is dignified? The word dignified was a little blade. Verity felt it pass close, meant to cut, without leaving evidence. I do not ask anyone to pretend, she said. I ask only that the truth be allowed to take longer than suspicion. Lady Maud's colour rose. Lady Octavia seized the moment. And what of history, Miss Althorne? Does truth need longer there as well? Verity's skin chilled before the words were finished. Mr. Vetch opened the leather folio. Inside lay 3 folded papers, tied with faded ribbon. The ribbon was brown at the edges, old enough to look honest. Verity knew before he spoke that her father's name waited inside. Some knowledge arrived not through reason, but through the body's memory of a door closing. In light of the present discovery, Vetch said, I felt it my duty to bring certain facts to His Grace's attention. Miss Althorne's late father, Thomas Althorne, was removed from his position as solicitor to the parish trustees after irregularities in charity funds. Mrs. Bellamy made a faint sound near the pianoforte. Lady Maud put one hand to her throat, not from shock, but because she knew the gesture suited the occasion. Verity did not move. If she moved, they would call it guilt. If she spoke too quickly, they would call it panic. If she remained silent, they would call it inheritance. Lady Octavia looked at the guests with sorrow perfectly measured. One does not like to refer to the sins of the dead, yet households, like families, have patterns. Lucian's voice cut through the room. That is enough. Is it? Lady Octavia asked softly. A jewel disappears. It is found with Miss Althorne. Her father's name was once attached to missing charitable money. Are we to ignore resemblance because it is uncomfortable? Resemblance is not proof. Neither is your sympathy. Silence followed. It was the first time Lady Octavia had aimed at him openly. Verity saw his jaw tighten. She also saw what he did not yet do. He did not say the brooch had been planted. He did not say Vetch lied. He did not say Lady Octavia had arranged the room like a scaffold made of upholstery and polite faces. He held the line, but only the line proof allowed him to hold. Verity told herself that was fair. Fairness did not prevent pain. May I see the papers? Lucian asked. Vetch handed them over with a bow. The Duke unfolded the first page and read in silence. His expression did not alter. But Verity had learned to read small changes in powerful men, because her safety had once depended on them. He had found something troubling, not decisive. Troubling. These are copies, he said. The originals remain with the parish trustees, Vetch replied. As far as I know, as far as you know. Your Grace, I merely provide context. Context is often accusation wearing a clean coat. The words should have comforted her. Instead, Verity felt the old shame begin to rise around her ankles. It had always behaved like water. Quiet at first, then everywhere. Her father at the parish table, her mother's gloves turned at the seams. The neighbors who stopped calling but did not stop watching. The day Verity entered service and learned that a name could fall faster than a body. Miss Althorne, Lucian said. She looked up. Did you place Lady Maud's brooch in your drawer? No, Your Grace. Did you take it from her chamber? No, Your Grace. Did you authorize anyone to open your drawer? No, Your Grace. Do you know how it came to be there? She paused. Every eye sharpened. If she said Vetch, they would demand proof. If she said Lady Octavia, the room would laugh without laughing. If she said she did not know, the simplicities would sound like failure. I know only that whoever placed it there wished it found quickly. Lucian looked at her for a long breath. Then he closed the papers and set them beside the brooch case. There will be no magistrate summoned today. Lady Maud rose halfway from the settee. Your Grace! Sit down, Lady Maud. She sat. Colour flared across her face. No servant will be dismissed on this evidence, he continued. No name will be ruined in my drawing room because convenience desires speed. Mr. Vetch, the duplicate keys will be surrendered to me immediately. The wage ledgers and all household account books will be placed in my study within the hour. Lady Octavia, no further discussion of Miss Althorne's father will be made before guests. Lady Octavia's smile vanished at the edges. You protect her very thoroughly. I protect the truth thoroughly. And if the truth proves ugly, then I will name it. Verity heard the strength in him. She also heard the omission. He had not named it yet. He would wait for proof. A just man might do no less. But a woman standing alone beneath accusation could still feel the distance between justice and trust. Lady Maud's voice trembled with offended elegance. And what of me? Am I to dine beside the knowledge that my jewel was found with a woman who remains in charge of the household? Lucian turned to Verity. His face had softened in a way only she could see, and that almost undid her. Miss Althorne will be relieved from duty for the present. The words struck harder than Lady Octavia's insinuations. Verity's hand moved to the keys at her waist. Relieved from duty for the present. The phrases were merciful in shape and devastating in weight. Around the room, several guests exchanged glances. Lady Maud looked satisfied. Mr. Vetch lowered his eyes to conceal triumph. Lady Octavia sat back as if order had begun to return. Lucian continued, Mrs. Vale will assume immediate household management under my direction. Miss Althorne will remain at Harrowden, unmolested and unquestioned, until this matter is resolved. He meant safety. Verity knew that. His voice carried no contempt. His decision shielded her from further commands, further sneers, perhaps even from Vetch. Yet protection could resemble removal when spoken before those who had wanted her displaced. A housekeeper without duties was not protected. She was suspended in public view. Your Grace is generous, Lady Octavia said. Miss Althorne must be grateful. Verity curtsied because there were no words she could trust. As your Grace commands. Lucian's gaze held hers for a moment, and something like regret crossed it, though perhaps she imagined that because she needed it. This is not a judgment against you. No, your Grace. Her voice remained steady. That was the last gift she could give herself. Only its rehearsal. The room heard. Even Lady Octavia stilled. Verity turned before anyone could answer and walked toward the door with the keys at her waist, chiming once, softly, like a warning bell. Behind her, Lucian said her name, but not loudly enough to command her return. That restraint was kind. It was also too late. In the corridor, the air below stairs rushed toward her, warmer and rougher than the drawing-room's perfumed stillness. Annie stood near the passage with both hands pressed to her mouth. Mrs. Vale looked stricken. Verity did not stop for comfort. If she stopped, she might fail to remain upright. She crossed beneath the green baize door and understood with a clarity so cold it felt clean. The Duke had prevented her ruin. He had not prevented her shame. And somewhere in Harrowden Hall, Mr. Vetch had just been given the one thing he needed most. Time. Verity did not learn. She was to be protected until Mrs. Vale came to pack her things. The old servant entered the housekeeper's room with a folded cloak over one arm and a face so carefully composed that it told Verity more than tears would have done. His Grace has arranged for you to stay at the Dower Lodge until the matter is settled, Mrs. Vale said. Mrs. Hensley is there already, a respectable widow. She'll serve as companion, so nobody can wag their tongues worse than they already have. Verity stood beside the narrow bed, where she had slept for 3 years beneath a sloped ceiling and a window that looked over the kitchen garden. Her room held little enough to pack. 2 plain gowns, a brush, a Bible, her mother's thimble, the prayer book with the copied ledger page inside it, the torn sleeve, folded in linen beneath her spare cuffs. She looked at the cloak in Mrs. Vale's hands and felt something in her become very still. When was this decided? After you left the drawing-room. I see. He means kindly, miss. That wounded more than accusation. Verity opened the small drawer beside the bed and removed the wrapped sleeve. Yes, I believe he does. Mrs. Vale stepped closer, lowering her voice. Vetch is pleased. That should tell you all you need to know. It does. Then don't make it easier for him. Let his Grace carry this for a day or 2. You need rest. Verity almost laughed. Rest was what the powerless were offered when others wished them out of the room. Safety was what powerful men called distance when danger made them uncomfortable. She did not blame the Duke for wanting her beyond Vetch's reach. That was the cruelty of it. His choice was reasonable. It was also unbearable. "If I go quietly," she said, "every maid below stairs will know what it means. They'll know His Grace removed you from the worst of it. No, they will know a jewel was found in my drawer, and by sunset I was taken from my post." Mrs. Vale's mouth tightened. "You think too much like the house. Someone must." Verity closed the small valise. The latch clicked with a sound too final for so little luggage. From below came the muffled thud of doors opening and closing, the rush of servants rearranging a house around absence. Her absence. Mrs. Vale reached for the key ring at Verity's waist, then stopped herself. "I was told to assume the duties." Verity looked down at the keys. For 3 years, their weight had marked every hour of her life. Linen presses, plate cupboards, storerooms, stillroom cabinet, the small locked drawer where a brooch had been planted like a verdict. She had once thought the keys made her useful. Now she saw they had made her convenient. "I shall give them to His Grace myself. Miss Althorne, I shall not have them passed from my waist like evidence taken from a prisoner." Mrs. Vale blinked hard, then nodded. "I'll have Annie bring your cloak after." "No, let Annie stay below. She has cried enough for one day." Verity took the valise in her uninjured hand and walked through the servants' passage without asking permission from anyone. The house saw her go. It saw in fragments, because houses like Harrowden were built to make witnesses of corners and doors. The scullery maid paused with a bucket. A footman stood still beside the service stairs. Cook stepped halfway into the passage with flower on her sleeve and did not speak because there were some loyalties words could cheapen. Verity gave them all the one thing she still possessed, a straight back. In the morning room, Lucian Pembroke stood alone beside the window, reading a note he had not finished. He looked up the instant she entered. The pale afternoon light showed the fatigue around his eyes. Though nothing else in him was disordered, he had the controlled expression of a man who had spent his life making decisions no one dared question. Verity curtsied. The keys sounded once at her waist. His gaze dropped to them, then to the valise in her hand. "Mrs. Vale told you?" "Yes, Your Grace. The Dower Lodge is within the park. Mrs. Hensley will remain with you. No one will approach without my permission. Vetch will have no access to you there." "That is thoughtful." He heard what she did not say. His face changed by a fraction. "You disagree. A servant does not disagree with a duke. You are not in this room as a servant under judgment. Then why am I being removed from my post?" The question landed between them, bare and quiet. Lucian set the note down, "Because remaining exposes you to further humiliation." "Humiliation has already been served before guests, Your Grace. Sending me away will not uneat it. You are wounded, accused, watched by every malicious eye in the house. And if I vanish after being accused, what will those eyes report by dinner?" He looked toward the window, then back to her. "I am trying to keep you safe." "I know." Her voice softened despite herself. That made the next words harder. "But you did not ask me what safety would cost." Silence filled the morning room. Somewhere in the corridor, a clock marked the half-hour. Lucian's hand closed once at his side, then opened. "You are right." She had not expected him to say it so simply. Men of rank often apologized like creditors, collecting gratitude for a debt they had barely paid. He did not. He stood still and accepted the rebuke that almost shook her resolve. Almost. Verity unfastened the key ring. The metal came free from her waist, with a strange lightness, as if some part of her had been cut away. She crossed the room and placed the keys on the table between them. Mrs. Vale will need these. Lucian looked at them, then at her. This is temporary. Perhaps, Miss Althorne, his voice lowered. I do not believe you took the brooch. The words came too late to save the morning, but not too late to hurt. Verity felt them enter the place where fear had been standing and make it ache. Then say so where they accused me. His face tightened. I will, when I can prove the hand that placed it there. No, Your Grace. When proof comes, anyone may stand beside me. I needed someone before it was comfortable. She saw the strike land, not in anger, in conscience. He stepped back as if distance might restore propriety to a moment that had become too honest. I failed you there. You protected me from ruin. That is not enough. No. Verity took the wrapped sleeve from her valise and held it for a moment. It is not. His eyes moved to the linen parcel. The torn cuff? Yes, keep it safe. I intend to. She returned it to the valise, then lifted the handle. Mrs. Hensley is expecting me. Yes. Then I shall not keep her waiting. Verity. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. Not carelessly, not with familiarity, with alarm, as if he had reached for it before rank could stop him. She froze, but did not turn fully. Your Grace. The correction stood between them like a closed door. His jaw tightened. Miss Althorne, I will find the truth. I hope you do. You doubt me. I doubt houses that close ranks around their own. I am not Lady Octavia. No, but Harrowden belongs to you, and I have learned that houses often teach their masters what not to see. He absorbed that too. It was a great deal to lay at a duke's feet. But Verity had already been stripped of enough to make caution feel almost absurd. She curtsied once, not deeply, and left the keys shining on the table. Mrs. Hensley's gig waited at the servants' entrance rather than the front steps. That, more than anything, revealed the compromise. She was being protected, but discreetly, removed, but not disgraced officially. Sent away through the door by which inconvenient truths were always carried. Annie stood near the passage with red eyes. Verity paused long enough to touch her shoulder. Do your work well. Do not cry where Mr. Vetch can see it. Will you come back, miss? I have not finished here. The Dower Lodge sat half a mile across the park, beyond wet grass and wind-bent beeches. As the gig rolled away from Harrowden Hall, Verity looked back only once. The great house stood pale and severe beneath the afternoon sky, every window bright with reflected light. Somewhere inside, the Duke had her keys. Somewhere inside, Mr. Vetch had time. That night, long after Mrs. Hensley had pressed tea on her and asked no questions, Verity woke to a thin orange glow beyond the lodge window. She rose, crossed the cold floor, and looked toward the estate yard. Behind the dark line of trees, a small fire burned where no fire should have been. For a moment, the flame lifted high enough to show a man's black coat and the pale flash of papers curling in heat. Verity put her uninjured hand over the prayer book on the table beside her bed. Vetch was burning receipts. The Duke had given him time, and now the truth was turning to ash. By morning, the ashes in the estate yard had been raked flat. Verity saw the dark patch from the Dower Lodge window while Mrs. Hensley poured tea into thin china cups and pretended not to watch her guest watching Harrowden. The old widow was a spare, upright woman with silver hair, a black gown, and the rare gift of silence. She had asked no questions when Verity arrived the night before. She had offered broth, clean sheets, and a locked drawer for private things. That kindness should have comforted Verity, but the glow she had seen beyond the trees had burned through every hour of sleep. Receipts had curled in flame while the house lay under the Duke's protection. Evidence had vanished because everyone had believed danger could be managed by distance. Verity touched the prayer book beside her plate. The copied ledger page remained inside. 1 page against whatever Mr. Vetch had destroyed. 1 page and a blood-stained sleeve folded in linen at the bottom of her valise. "You have not eaten," Mrs. Hensley said. "I have considered eating. Consideration won't sustain you." Verity almost smiled. "You sound like Mrs. Vale." Then Mrs. Vale is a sensible woman. A knock came before Verity could answer. Not the uncertain knock of a maid. Not the casual rap of a servant sent with a message. This one was formal, measured, and heavy with consequence. Mrs. Hensley went to the door herself. A footman stood outside, rain speckled on his shoulders, holding a folded note sealed with black wax. "From Harrowden, ma'am. Her ladyship's man said it was to be delivered at once." Verity knew before the seal was broken that the letter would not be from Lucian. Lady Octavia preferred paper when she wished cruelty to outlive a room. Mrs. Hensley read the direction aloud. "For Miss Althorne." Verity took it. Her name had been written in a fine slanted hand, every letter elegant enough to make contempt look educated. She broke the wax. Inside was not a letter, but a copy of one, old paper, old accusation. A note in Lady Octavia's hand lay atop it. "Miss Althorne, in view of recent distressing events, I have sent this copy to His Grace, Lady Maud, and the parish trustees, lest sentiment obscure history. Families do repeat themselves." Verity read the next page only once. She did not need more. "Thomas Althorne, formerly solicitor to the trustees of St. Bartholomew's Widows and Orphans Fund, is hereby named in connection with the improper removal of charitable moneys. His refusal to provide complete account books must be understood as an admission of irregular conduct." The words blurred at the edges, not because she wept, but because rage had a way of making the world narrow. "Miss Althorne?" Mrs. Hensley asked. Verity laid the paper flat on the table with both hands. Her injured arm protested. She ignored it. "Lady Octavia has found a way to accuse a dead man of stealing from widows while pretending to defend them." Mrs. Hensley's mouth hardened. "That is an ugly art." "It is an old one. Was your father guilty?" The question was plain, and because it was plain, Verity did not resent it. "No." "Then we shall proceed from there." Verity looked up. That simple we nearly undid her. Before she could answer, carriage wheels sounded on the wet gravel outside. "Mrs." Hensley went to the window. "His Grace." Verity folded the letter, then unfolded it again, because her fingers needed something to do. Lucian Pembroke entered the lodge parlour, with his hat in one hand and rain on the shoulders of his dark coat. He stopped just inside the threshold until Mrs. Hensley returned to her chair. Propriety, even now, especially now. His gaze moved to the paper on the table. "She sent it to you, and to others according to her note." "Yes." His voice was quiet. "I came as soon as I learned." "Then you learned before I did." "By minutes, not by choice." "Does that distinction comfort you, Your Grace?" Mrs. Hensley's teacup paused. Lucian accepted the blow without flinching. "No." Verity looked at him then. He seemed less like judgment this morning, and more like a man who had discovered judgment could turn in his own hands. "Lady Octavia has asked the parish trustees to attend Harrowden tomorrow," he said. "She means to tie the brooch to your father's disgrace." "Of course she does. One planted jewel looks like misfortune. 2 generations look like blood." His jaw tightened. "Do not use her language. I am not using it. I am naming its purpose." Silence settled between them, filled by rain tapping the window glass. Lucian moved no nearer. Verity wondered whether he knew she was grateful for that. She could not have borne tenderness if it came with command. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for sending me here, for deciding what safety meant before asking you what dignity required." The words struck with painful accuracy. She had prepared herself for explanation, for defense, for noble regret, dressed in authority. "Not this. You were trying to protect me." "Yes, and I gave Vetch time." Her eyes lifted sharply. "You know, the stable boy saw the ashes before dawn. I sent a groom to question him quietly. Vetch claims he burned old packing papers. He burned receipts. I believe so. Belief will not restore them. No, but it will change how I proceed." Verity folded Lady Octavia's letter again with careful hands. "What do you intend?" "The account room will be opened in my presence. Mr. Anstruther, my solicitor, has been sent for from York. The parish trustees will be asked to bring whatever original records remain concerning your father. Vetch will surrender all duplicate keys. He will surrender what he wishes you to see. Then we will look where he does not wish us to look." There it was again, that dangerous "we." Verity turned her face toward the rain-dark window. Harrowden stood beyond the trees, pale and remote, as if it had not watched her humiliation with all its glass eyes. "I will face the trustees," she said, "not as an accused servant hidden in a lodge. I will face them at Harrowden, with my father's name spoken in the room where Lady Octavia chose to stain it. That is exactly what she wants. No, she wants me frightened of it." Lucian did not answer at once. When he did, his voice had changed, not softer, lower. "And what do you want from me?" Verity looked back. The question mattered because it did not assume. It opened a door and waited. "The accounts," she said, "all of them, not summaries, not Mr. Vetch's explanations. The wage ledgers, the charity records, the key cabinet, the old correspondence, and the right to read what concerns my father." "Granted. Do not grant it like a favor." He bowed his head once. "Then it is acknowledged as your right." Mrs. Hensley looked down into her tea, but Verity saw the faint approval at the corner of her mouth. Lucian stepped to the table and placed something beside Lady Octavia's letter. A small packet wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Vale sent this. She said you left in haste." Verity opened it. Inside lay a fresh needle case, a spool of black thread, and the torn cuff wrapped as Verity had left it. "I already had the sleeve. There were 2 pieces. This was caught beneath the edge of your work drawer after you left." Her breath caught. She lifted the torn cuff into the grey light. The fabric still bore the faint rust-red mark, darkened now at the seam. Near the rip, caught where the mending had split, was a short thread not her own. Not cotton from her cuff, not linen from the napkins. A dark wool thread, coarse and nearly black, twisted with a greenish cast. Verity went still. Memory sharpened. The estate office. Mr. Vetch close enough to block the door. His black coat brushed with dark green thread at the cuff where the fabric had frayed. The warning in his voice, the pain in her arm after he caught her before she could pass him, with the copied figures hidden in her hand. "Miss Althorne," Lucian said. Verity held up the thread. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that both he and Mrs. Hensley leaned toward it. "This is from Mr. Vetch's office coat." Lucian's eyes fixed on the torn seam. "You are certain? I mended one like it for the second footman last winter, because the cloth was unusual. Dark wool with a green cast. Cheap, but meant to imitate better broadcloth. Mr. Vetch wears the same in his office coat." The room seemed to gather around the small thread, that plain, foolish, precious fragment. Not proof enough for law. Not yet, but proof enough for direction. Lucian looked at the sleeve, then at Verity's face. Then he was close enough to tear it. Yes, and close enough to mark you. Verity closed her fingers around the fabric, close enough to learn that Althornes still keep records. Outside, the rain eased. Beyond the lodge window, Harrowden waited with its locked doors, polished tables, and old sins dressed as order. Verity placed Lady Octavia's letter inside the prayer book beside the copied ledger page. Then she folded the torn sleeve around the dark thread as carefully as if it were a relic. When she looked up, Lucian was watching her, not with pity, not with command, but with something steadier and far more dangerous: trust. "Tomorrow," he said, "we open the account room." Verity stood, the prayer book in one hand and the sleeve in the other. "No, Your Grace. Tomorrow we open Harrowden." The next morning, Verity returned to Harrowden Hall through the front door. That was Lucian's doing, and everyone knew it. The carriage stopped beneath the stone portico rather than at the servants' entrance, and for one suspended moment, the footman did not seem to know whether to open the door as they would for a guest, or stand aside as they would for someone who had once carried keys below stairs. Lucian resolved the matter without raising his voice. "Miss Althorne is here as a witness in my inquiry. She will be received accordingly." The nearest footman bowed and opened the carriage door. Verity stepped down in her plain black gown, the prayer book in one hand and the wrapped sleeve in the other. She heard the hush before she saw its source. A house had many ways of watching: a parlour maid at the stair, a footman near the umbrella stand, Lady Maud's maid above the landing, pretending to adjust a vase. Verity had crossed this hall 100 times with household lists and linen inventories, but never as someone escorted by a duke, a solicitor, and the truth. Mr. Anstruther had arrived from York before breakfast, a thin, elderly man with bright eyes, neat whiskers, and a leather case that looked too worn for vanity. Mrs. Vale stood near the green baize door, her face stern enough to hide relief until Verity was close. Then her fingers touched Verity's elbow for 1 second. It was not a servant's gesture. It was a motherly one, offered and gone before the house could feed on it. "You came back," Mrs. Vale whispered. "I told Annie I had not finished here. She believed you. Did you, Mrs.?" Vale's mouth trembled, then steadied. "I hoped." Lucian heard none of it, or pretended not to. That was one of his better kindnesses. He led them not to the drawing room, where Lady Octavia's influence made every chair seem enlisted against the weak, but to the estate office in the west wing. The corridor narrowed as they went. Polished guest spaces gave way to plainer boards, locked cupboards, ledgers stacked behind glass, and the faint, dry smell of ink, dust, and old decisions. Verity had passed this door often. She had never before entered it without Mr. Vetch standing between her and the desk. Today, Mr. Vetch was already inside, stiff-backed and watchful, with his office coat buttoned too carefully at the cuffs. When he saw Verity, his eyes went first to the parcel in her hands, then to Lucian. "Your Grace, I must protest the presence of Miss Althorne in the estate office. Given the accusation pending against her, it seems irregular. Most injustice is defended by men who call fairness irregular," Lucian said. "Open the cabinet." Vetch's mouth tightened. "The cabinet contains private estate matters. So does this inquiry." Mr. Anstruther set his leather case on the desk and removed spectacles, a notebook, and 2 sharpened pencils. "Mr. Vetch, I advise compliance. His Grace's authority in this room is not symbolic." Vetch unlocked the cabinet. The movement was smooth, but Verity saw the smallest hesitation before he chose the second key on his ring. Lucian saw it too. "Give me the ring." "Your Grace?" "The duplicate household and office keys." All of them. Vetch removed the ring slowly and placed it in Lucian's palm. For one irrational instant, Verity remembered placing her own keys on the morning room table. The memory struck like cold water. Lucian glanced at her as if he had followed the same thought, then set Vetch's keys beside Mr. Anstruther's notebook. Mrs. Vale, remain at the door. No one enters without my permission. Yes, Your Grace. The search began with the ledgers, not dramatically. Truth often entered rooms with paper dust on its shoes. Mr. Anstruther compared wage entries with Verity's copied page, while Lucian opened drawers and Verity named the books by sight. Household wages, stable accounts, coal, candles, repairs to tenants' cottages, parish disbursements, widow's fund. Vetch's face remained composed until the solicitor asked for the key cabinet records. Then his hand shifted toward his coat cuff. Verity looked at the fabric. Dark wool with a greenish cast. The same thread lay caught in the torn sleeve inside her parcel. Miss Althorne, Lucian said quietly. What do you see? He had not asked what she suspected. He had asked what she saw. That distinction steadied her. The lower left shelf has been dusted recently, but not the floor beneath it. Mr. Anstruther turned. An observant note. The shelf was usually neglected, Mr. Vetch rarely allowed maids to clean near the key cabinet. Lucian crouched and drew the shelf outward. A narrow strip of wood gave under his hand. Behind it lay a small paper packet. He handed it to Mr. Anstruther, who unfolded it over the desk. Inside were 3 pale wax impressions, each pressed with the delicate shape of a key. Mrs. Vale drew in a breath. Vetch gave a small laugh. Wax impressions prove nothing. Estate offices require copies. Copies are made by locksmiths, not hidden behind shelves, Mr. Anstruther said. Lucian picked up one impression with careful fingers. This one is the size of Miss Althorne's work drawer key. Verity did not speak. The room did not need her pain to understand. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Vale opened it only a hand's width, then looked back. It is Annie, Your Grace. She says she must speak. Vetch turned sharply. The girl has no business here. Annie entered before fear could stop her entirely. Her cap was crooked. Her hands shook around a folded scrap of paper. She looked first at Verity, and the shame in her face told Verity everything before the girl spoke. I'm sorry, miss. Verity stepped toward her. For what? Mr. Vetch made me carry notes. I didn't know what was in them. I swear I didn't. He said if I refused, he'd send my brother from the stables without a character. Vetch's voice snapped low. This is nonsense from a foolish girl. Annie flinched. Verity moved between them without thinking. Not dramatically. Not enough to invite rebuke. Simply enough that the girl no longer had to look at the man who frightened her. Annie, breathe. I took one to Lady Octavia's sitting room yesterday morning, and one before the brooch went missing. Her ladyship burned the first after reading it, but the second dropped near the fender. I kept it. I don't know why. I was scared. She held out the scrap. Mr. Anstruther took it, smoothed it, and read aloud. The drawer is prepared. The girl will be blamed if necessary. A silence entered the room like a fourth authority. Lucian's face hardened. Oh, it could mean anything, Vetch said, but his voice had lost its oil. It could, Mr. Anstruther said. That is why we continue. Annie began to cry silently. Verity turned to her. You will not lose your place for telling the truth. Mr. Vetch said no one would believe me. He was wrong. Verity looked to Lucian. This was not a request she could make like a servant begging mercy. It had to be a demand shaped by justice. Your Grace, Annie's wages must be secured, and her brother's place must not be threatened because she obeyed under fear. Lucian answered at once. Done, Mrs. Vale, see that both receive written assurance by evening. Mr. Anstruther will prepare it." Annie stared at Verity as if protection had become visible. "Thank you, miss. Do not thank me. Tell the truth completely when asked, and never carry a sealed note for a frightened man again." A weak laugh broke through Annie's tears. Mrs. Vale took her away. When the door closed, Verity realized Lucian was watching her. Not the sleeve, not the scandal. Her. "What is it? Your Grace. They obeyed you because you cared whether they survived." The words were too intimate for the office. Verity lowered her eyes to the ledger. Fear is a poor foundation for a household. And care? Care is stronger, if one can afford it. He reached for the same ledger she did. Their hands nearly met over the cracked leather cover. Both stopped. A careful inch remained between his glove and her fingers. Nothing improper had happened. Yet the silence altered. It held the strange, forbidden warmth of being understood by someone who should have been too far above her to see. Mr. Anstruther cleared his throat, rescuing them both. "Your Grace, Miss Althorne, I believe you should look at this." He had opened the old parish disbursement book. A line near the bottom listed the St. Bartholomew's Widows and Orphans Fund, the year of Thomas Althorne's disgrace, and a transfer large enough to ruin a lesser man. Beside it, not in Verity's father's hand, was a signature written with elegant slanting confidence. Lady Octavia Renshaw. Lucian took the book. Verity saw his fingers tighten at the spine. Mr. Vetch turned very pale. The office, with all its locked drawers and hidden wax, seemed suddenly unable to protect anyone. Mr. Anstruther tapped the page once. "It appears, Your Grace, that the missing widow's money did not pass through Mr. Althorne's hands alone." Verity looked at the signature until the letters stopped being ink and became a door opening. Her father had not been cleared. Not yet. But for the first time, the lie that buried him had a visible seam, and seams, Verity knew, could be torn. Lady Octavia's signature did not explode through Harrowden Hall. It seeped. By luncheon, no guest had been told what Mr. Anstruther found in the parish disbursement book, yet every room seemed to know some invisible wall had shifted. Mr. Vetch remained in the estate office under the solicitor's supervision, pale and courteous, in the manner of a man listening for the first crack in ice. Lady Octavia did not appear at luncheon, which was more alarming than if she had swept in and silenced the room with her cane. Lady Maud Fenwick, however, appeared in pearl earrings, not the missing brooch. Earrings, small, deliberate, gleaming reminders that jewels had witnesses even when truth did not. Verity took no place at table, of course. She was not housekeeper now, not guest, not family, not servant under command. She had become something Harrowden did not know how to name. A witness. That word should have strengthened her. But a witness still needed someone powerful to allow the room to hear. She spent the early afternoon in the small book room adjoining the West Passage with Mrs. Vale nearby for propriety, sorting the copied ledger page, Lady Octavia's letter, the torn sleeve, and the dark thread into an order Mr. Anstruther could follow. The room smelled of leather bindings and damp roses from a bowl left too long on the table. Beyond the closed door, voices passed in fragments. Guests, servants. A house pretending a scandal was not gathering beneath its floorboards. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Vale was called away by cook over a disagreement involving the dinner covers, and Verity was left by the open door with strict instructions not to move if anyone important came near. She almost smiled at that. Important people had been coming near all week. That was the trouble. She had just folded the sleeve back into its linen when Lady Maud's voice drifted from the adjoining morning room. Low but clear, through the half-open connecting door. "Your Grace, I hope you know I speak only from concern." Verity went still. Lucian answered with a courtesy so cool it seemed to lower the temperature. "Concern has been plentiful at Harrowden. It has not always been useful. Then let me be useful." A pause followed. Verity could imagine Lady Maud standing near the window, arranging herself in soft light, wounded dignity refined into strategy. "This house is on the edge of a story it may not survive gracefully. Your aunt's name is being whispered with parish funds. Your steward appears compromised. Your housekeeper has become the center of a drama no county family will stop discussing. You need stability." "Do I? You need a duchess who can make society look elsewhere." The silence that followed was so sharp. Verity felt it in her hands. She looked down at the torn sleeve. The thread caught in the seam seemed suddenly very small against the machinery of rank. "That is an unusual offer, Lady Maud," Lucian said. "No, it is a sensible one. My family is old. My connections are sound. I know how rooms behave, and I know how to quiet them. If you announce an understanding with me, attention moves from an ugly household affair to a respectable alliance. And Miss Althorne, she may be compensated." Verity's fingers closed over the linen parcel. "Kindly," Lady Maud added, as if kindness were a trim one sewed on cruelty, to make it acceptable. "A pension, a position elsewhere, a grateful letter from you. No one need be harsh, but your Grace cannot lift a servant into the center of your house without teaching every guest to stare." Lucian's voice changed. It did not rise. It became less polished. "Miss Althorne is not a servant to be swept aside because your imagination cannot place dignity below stairs. Please don't mistake me. I feel for her. Truly, I do. But feeling for a woman and tying your name to her are different acts." Verity closed her eyes. That was the sentence society had written over women like her for years. Pity was permitted. Partnership was absurd. A door opened. Lady Octavia's voice entered like a blade drawn slowly from silk. "Lady Maud is brave to say what others will only whisper." "Lucian, were you listening, Aunt? I have had practice listening in my own family's house. It is my house. Then preserve it." Lady Octavia's cane tapped once. "You are a duke. You cannot make a crusade of a housekeeper's grievance and expect England to applaud your virtue. Choose family. Choose rank. Choose common sense. If Miss Althorne is innocent, she can be cleared quietly. If I am mistaken, I will endure your displeasure. But if you stand before guests and trustees, beside that woman against your own blood, you will make yourself ridiculous." Verity expected Lucian to answer at once. He did not. The pause lasted long enough for fear to find its old place in her chest. Perhaps he was considering not truth, but cost. Perhaps even the best men reached a point where justice looked noble in private and foolish before witnesses. "Lady Maud," he said at last, "I will not marry you." Verity breathed again, but the breath hurt. "That is direct," Lady Maud said, her voice tight. "It is meant to be. Because of her, because of myself." Another pause. "I do not need a duchess who teaches rooms to look elsewhere. I need to become a man who can bear being looked at when truth stands beside him." Lady Octavia made a sound of disgust. "You speak like a poet, and a foolish one." "No, I speak like the master of Harrowden." "Tomorrow morning, the parish trustees will attend in the drawing room. Mr. Anstruther will present the records. Dr. Pritchard will speak to the injury. Mrs. Vale and Annie will testify to the notes. Mr. Vetch will answer publicly. So will you. You would question me before county guests. I would question the Archbishop of Canterbury if he planted a brooch in a woman's drawer. Lady Maud gasped softly. Lady Octavia did not. Her silence was colder. Then you have chosen scandal. No, I have chosen not to let scandal choose for me. Footsteps moved toward the hall. Verity turned quickly from the connecting door, but not quickly enough. Lucian appeared in the bookroom entrance and stopped. He saw the sleeve in her hand. He saw her face. He knew she had heard. For one suspended second, neither of them performed the roles the house demanded. Then Verity curtsied. "Forgive me, Your Grace." The door was open. "There is nothing in my answer I wished hidden from you. It was the right answer." Still, the wrong part of her had already heard the pause. Lady Maud spoke plainly. Lady Maud spoke usefully. She revealed what the room will think before the room says it. Verity wrapped the sleeve with deliberate care. Then perhaps the room is not wrong to think it. "I have been a housekeeper here. A jewel was found in my drawer. My father's name is not yet cleared. Your aunt is your family. Lady Maud would be accepted before the ink dried." Accepted by whom? Everyone who matters to people like her. Do those people matter to you? The question was too gentle. Verity looked at the shelves instead of him. "They have mattered enough to ruin my father, dismiss servants, and turn a wound into entertainment." Lucian stepped closer, stopping several feet away, because the open door could not alone make them equals. "Then tomorrow they matter enough to be corrected. Corrected by you, by evidence, by testimony, by you, if you choose to speak." She turned then. "If I choose, yes, and if I choose not to be placed before them again?" His face tightened, but he did not command. "Then I will not drag you there." The answer steadied something in her more than any vow could have done. Verity laid the prayer book on the table, then placed the wrapped sleeve beside it. "I will attend." Lucian's eyes moved to the plain black gown she wore. As Miss Althorne, as the woman they accused, as the daughter of the man they buried beneath convenient papers, as the person whose sleeve they tore and whose drawer they used. Her voice did not shake. That surprised her. "Not as your rescue." "Never that," he said it quickly, almost sharply, as if the idea offended him. Then more quietly, "May I stand beside you tomorrow?" The question entered the room softly, but it carried more weight than Lady Maud's proposal, Lady Octavia's threats, and every whisper Harrowden had gathered. It was not a command. It was not an arrangement made over her head. It was a request made at the edge of public cost. Verity looked at the Duke of Westmere, at the man who had failed her by deciding for her, and had learned enough to ask, "Only if you can bear what it will cost." His expression did not change, but his eyes did. "I can. Do not answer as a duke. Then as a man I can." Verity picked up the torn sleeve, feeling the dark thread hidden within its fold. "Tomorrow, Your Grace, they will not look away." From the corridor beyond, Lady Octavia's cane struck the floor once, then receded, measured, and certain. She had heard enough, so had Harrowden. By morning, the drawing-room would not merely hold guests. It would hold every lie that had ever believed itself safe behind polished doors. Morning did not break over Harrowden Hall so much as draw every curtain upon it. The house stood polished, aired, and watchful, with fires lit in rooms that felt colder for their brightness. By 10 o'clock, the blue drawing-room had been arranged again. But this time Lady Octavia had not arranged it. Lucian had. That difference could be read in every chair. The parish trustees sat near the writing table with their ledgers and uneasy faces. Mr. Anstruther occupied the small desk by the window, his papers aligned in neat stacks. Dr. Pritchard stood beside the hearth. Not as a guest, but as a man prepared to speak plainly. Mrs. Vale waited near the door, with Annie beside her, the young maid's hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Lady Maud sat rigidly beneath a portrait of the second Duchess of Westmere, wearing lavender silk and an expression that suggested she had been forced to attend a sermon delivered in bad taste. Lady Octavia entered last, which was exactly as she intended. Her gown was dark plum, her widow's cap immaculate, her cane polished until its silver head caught the light. She looked neither frightened nor guilty. She looked inconvenienced by lesser minds. Mr. Vetch followed her, carrying no folio now. His hands were empty, and that made them seem more suspect. Verity stood outside the drawing-room door for one final breath with the wrapped sleeve in her hands. She wore the same plain black gown, no borrowed lace, no attempt to soften herself for people who had mistaken plainness for permission. Lucian stood beside the threshold, not touching her, not blocking her path. "You do not have to begin," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." His eyes moved over her face. "Then I will stand where you asked me to stand." "Where is that?" "Near enough to answer if called, not near enough to speak over you." The tight place beneath her ribs eased. Not enough to remove fear, enough to let dignity pass through it. "Thank you, Your Grace, Verity." She looked up. The name should have been improper. It should have been dangerous. In that narrow pause before public truth, it sounded instead like a promise he would not make aloud. "They are waiting," she said. He inclined his head and opened the door. The room turned toward her. Once, that attention would have felt like exposure. Now it felt like weather. Unpleasant, unavoidable, survivable. Verity crossed the carpet and placed the wrapped linen parcel on the table before Mr. Anstruther. No one spoke. That was the first small victory. They had expected trembling, apology, a servant shrinking under rank. She gave them silence and steady hands. Lucian took his place beside the mantel, several feet from her. "We are gathered," he said, "because accusation has already been made publicly in this house. Therefore, truth will not be hidden privately for the comfort of those who made it public." Lady Octavia gave a faint smile. "A noble opening, Lucian. I hope it will lead to facts rather than theatrics." "So do I." Mr. Anstruther rose. "For clarity, the matters before us are these. Lady Maud Fenwick's pearl brooch was found in Miss Althorne's locked drawer. Miss Althorne had earlier appeared with a torn sleeve and visible injury. Certain documents concerning her late father, Mr. Thomas Althorne, were then circulated by Lady Octavia Renshaw. The wage ledgers and parish disbursement books have since been examined. "And the brooch," Lady Maud said. "Let us not lose the jewel beneath all this paper." Verity turned to her. "No, my lady, let us not lose anything." Lady Maud's mouth closed. Lady Octavia tapped her cane once. "Miss Althorne speaks boldly for someone who stands beneath suspicion." "Suspicion is not a roof, my lady. I do not intend to live beneath it." A murmur moved across the room. One trustee looked down to hide an expression that might almost have been admiration. Mr. Vetch's lips tightened. Lady Octavia's smile thinned, then returned. "Very well, explain the brooch." Verity unfolded the linen slowly. The torn sleeve lay exposed on the table, clean except for the faint rust-colored mark that no washing had entirely removed. Near the ripped seam, Mr. Anstruther had pinned the small dark thread beneath a slip of paper. The object looked pitifully ordinary. That was its strength. It did not glitter, it did not flatter, it simply remained. "Mr. Vetch stated that my injury came from the linen room," Verity said. Her voice carried farther than she expected. He stated that Lady Maud's brooch was found in my drawer because I must have placed it there. He also held duplicate keys to that drawer. I have one question. She turned toward Vetch. He did not look away, though his colour had begun to fail. If I cut myself in the linen room, why is thread from your office coat caught in the bloodied seam? The room did not gasp. It became stiller than that. Stillness could be louder than surprise. Mr. Vetch gave a careful laugh. Miss Althorne has developed an imaginative talent under pressure. Answer her, Lucian said. Coats shed threads. Servants carry garments. Cloth travels. Verity looked to Dr. Pritchard. Doctor! The physician came forward. I examined Miss Althorne's arm on the night of the dinner. The injury was a scrape laid over, bruising older than the tear caused at table. The bruise was consistent with a firm grasp. I cannot name the person responsible, but I can say the mark did not resemble an ordinary brush against a shelf. Lady Octavia's voice cooled. Doctors often see patterns where drama instructs them. Dr. Pritchard bowed slightly. My lady, I have seen enough bruises from ordinary accidents to know when a shelf has no fingers. Annie made a small sound that might have become a laugh if she had not been terrified. Verity did not smile. She lifted the sleeve again. This thread matches the coat Mr. Vetch wore in the estate office. I remember the cloth because the weave is unusual. Mrs. Vale can confirm that I have mended the servants' garments often enough to know one wool from another. I can, Mrs. Vale said. Miss Althorne notices cloth the way some ladies notice diamonds. Lady Maud flushed. Mr. Anstruther opened his notebook. The sleeve is not our only evidence. Yesterday, behind a false strip of wood in the key cabinet, we found wax impressions of several keys, one matching the size and cut of Miss Althorne's work drawer key. Mr. Vetch controlled the duplicate keys. The drawer showed no signs of force. Vetch spread his hands. I controlled many keys. That proves responsibility, not guilt. Then let us discuss responsibility, Verity said. She turned slightly. Annie. The girl stepped forward with Mrs. Vale's hand briefly at her back. I carried notes, Annie said, her voice shaking. Mr. Vetch gave them to me. He said he'd have my brother sent off without a character if I didn't. One note went to Lady Octavia before the brooch was found. Lies, Vetch said sharply. Annie flinched, but Verity did not. Do not look at him, she said. Look at me. Annie did. What did the note say? I didn't read it then. But one paper fell later near her ladyship's fender. I kept it because I was scared. It said, the drawer is prepared. The girl will be blamed if necessary. Oh. Lady Octavia's cane stopped moving, only for a second. It was enough. Oh, Mr. Anstruther repeated. A curious initial. Lady Octavia lifted her chin. Octavia is not the only name in England beginning with that letter. No, Lucian said, but it is the only one in this room attached to the parish signature we found yesterday. He nodded to Mr. Anstruther. The solicitor opened the old disbursement book and turned it so the trustees could see. The St. Bartholomew's Widows and Orphans Fund, the year of Mr. Althorne's disgrace, a disputed transfer. The signature beside it is Lady Octavia Renshaw's. One of the trustees leaned forward. Another removed his spectacles and wiped them with a hand that was not steady. Lady Octavia laughed softly. My name appears on many papers connected to charitable matters. That is what patronesses do. Do patronesses also circulate copies accusing dead solicitors after a brooch appears in a drawer opened by copied keys? Verity asked. The question did what grief never could. It made the room look at Lady Octavia without deference. Verity felt the change pass through the carpet, the walls, the bodies of servants and gentry alike. A woman of rank was being seen as a woman with motive. Vetch sensed it too. Sweat shone faintly at his temple. "This is absurd," he said. "I managed accounts as directed. I kept keys as directed. I sent notes when her ladyship required discretion. I will not be made the sole villain because a great lady wishes clean gloves." The silence after that was total. Lady Octavia turned her head very slowly. "Mr. Vetch." He looked at her, and something desperate broke through his caution. "No, my lady, not this time." Lucian stepped away from the mantel. "Explain yourself." Vetch swallowed. His eyes moved from Lucian to Verity to the trustees, and finally back to Lady Octavia, who had gone pale beneath her powder. When he spoke, his voice had lost all polish. "Ask her where the widow's money went." For one breath after Mr. Vetch spoke, Harrowden Hall seemed to forget it was a house. No clock ticked, no gown rustled. No servant shifted weight from one foot to the other. Even Lady Octavia's cane remained suspended above the carpet, its silver head catching a blade of morning light like a small, cold star. Verity looked from Vetch to Lady Octavia and understood that the room had reached the place all lies feared most. Not the accusation, the answer. Lucian's voice broke the silence first. "Mr. Vetch, you will speak plainly." Vetch's throat moved. Whatever bargain he had carried with Lady Octavia had shattered the moment he realized rank would not protect him if she could sacrifice him instead. "The money went to cover debts," he said. "Not mine. Not at first." Lady Octavia's face hardened. "Careful. I was careful for years, my lady." His voice rose, then steadied under Lucian's stare. "I altered wage records because I was told the estate could bear it better than public scandal. I moved small sums from servants' pay, then from repairs, then from the Widows' and Orphans' Fund. Her ladyship said it would be replaced after settlements were made." Lady Maud gave a sharp little gasp. "Settlements?" Lucian turned to her. "Be silent unless you wish to be useful." She closed her mouth. Vetch looked toward the trustees with a desperation almost ugly in its plainness. Mr. Althorne noticed discrepancies. He asked for original books. He would not be soothed with summaries. Her ladyship said he was ambitious, that he wanted influence over the trustees. Then papers vanished. The missing sum was placed under his hand. He had no patron strong enough to contradict her. Verity heard her father's name and felt the room tilt, but she did not fall. Mrs. Vale moved as if to step toward her, then stopped. Verity was grateful. If anyone touched her now, she might break, and she had not come this far to break before them. Lady Octavia rose. "This is the talk of a desperate steward." "Yes," Lucian said, "he is desperate. Desperate men often become honest when lies no longer pay them. You cannot possibly place his word above mine." "No." Lucian took the old disbursement book from Mr. Anstruther and held it open. "I place your signature beside his word. I place the wax impressions beside his word. I place Annie's note beside his word. I place Miss Althorne's torn sleeve beside his word. I place missing wages, burned receipts, and a planted brooch beside his word. You are not being condemned by one man's fear, aunt. You are being surrounded by your own evidence." Lady Octavia's colour drained beneath her powder. "I did what was necessary to preserve Westmere." The words came not as denial, but as belief. That was worse. Verity saw it then. Lady Octavia did not think herself wicked. She thought herself entitled to decide which lives could be spent to protect polished rooms. Lucian saw it too. His expression changed, and the man who had once seemed made of restraint became something quieter and more final. "Westmere was not disgraced by a housekeeper bleeding in my dining room," he said. "Westmere was disgraced by those who made her bleed and called it order. It was disgraced by wages taken from servants who had no voice. It was disgraced by a good man's name, buried so a lady's debts might remain perfumed. If my house needed cruelty to preserve it, then it deserved to fall. Lady Octavia gripped her cane. You would shame your own blood for her. Lucian looked toward Verity, but he did not answer as a lover. He answered as a duke before witnesses. I would shame anyone who mistook rank for innocence. The words settled over the room with the weight of judgment. One trustee stood, pale and shaken. Mr. Althorne's case must be reopened in our records. If these books are accurate, the accusation against him cannot stand. Mr. Anstruther nodded. I will prepare a formal correction for the trustees' signatures and copies for the parish register. His name will be cleared in writing. Verity pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. Cleared in writing. A phrase so small for a wound that had consumed years. Her father would not walk back through the door. Her mother would not regain the callers who had vanished from the lane, but the lie would no longer sit on his grave, wearing the face of truth. Lucian turned to Vetch. You are dismissed from every position connected to this estate. You will remain under supervision until the justice of the peace is notified. If restitution is required, it will be pursued. If imprisonment is judged proper, you will answer for that before the law. Vetch sagged as if strings had been cut. Your Grace, I only obeyed. Then you chose obedience over conscience. That is not innocence. 2 footmen moved at Lucian's signal, not roughly, but with enough firmness to show the room that power had changed hands. Vetch was taken from the drawing-room without drama. His departure left behind no triumph, only air that seemed cleaner because fear had lost a spokesman. Lady Maud rose next, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This has become unspeakably unpleasant. I trust my brooch will be returned. Lucian picked up the velvet case from Mr. Anstruther's table and handed it to her. Your brooch will be returned. Your accusation will not. I was wronged too. You were used, and you were willing to enjoy the use while it wounded someone beneath you. Her lips parted. No polished answer came. My offer yesterday, she said in a low voice, was meant to save you. No, Lady Maud. It was meant to purchase me cheaply at the exact moment you thought me afraid. She looked around the room and found no rescue. Even the county ladies had turned their faces away. Within an hour, they would tell the story carefully. Within a week, London would know that Lady Maud Fenwick had offered respectability and been refused before trustees. That was consequence enough for someone who lived by reflected admiration. She curtsied stiffly and withdrew. Lady Octavia remained standing. And what of me, Lucian? You will leave Harrowden before dusk. Her cane struck the carpet. You cannot cast me out like a servant. Verity felt the word land, then saw Lucian's eyes harden. No servant in my house will be used as the measure of disgrace again. His voice lowered. Your allowance will be placed under review through Mr. Anstruther. You will retain what is proper for your maintenance, not what permits further manipulation. You will surrender all correspondence and account papers in your possession. You will not preside over Harrowden. You will not approach Miss Althorne, and you will not use the Westmere name to silence anyone again. For the first time, Lady Octavia looked old, not frail, merely old in the way power looked when it discovered it was not immortal. You will regret this. I already regret too much. He gave her a slight bow, not affectionate, not cruel. Final. Lady Octavia left between 2 walls of silence. When the door closed behind her, Verity realized the room was still looking at her. Not as spectacle now, as witness. as the person who had carried the first visible proof of rot into the light. Mr. Anstruther approached with a paper. "Miss Althorne, I will need your statement later, when you feel able." "I am able now." Lucian's gaze flicked to her, filled with something like grief and pride together. "You need not continue standing." "Yes, Your Grace, I do." So she spoke. She gave dates, she gave figures, she gave Annie's fear, cook's missing wages, the dismissed maids without references, the drawer, the cuff, the thread, the ledger page hidden in her prayer book. She did not tremble until Mr. Anstruther wrote her father's full name and placed beside it the word exonerated. When the inquiry ended, the trustees bowed to her, not deeply, not as to a duchess or a lady of rank, but they bowed. That was enough to make Mrs. Vale wipe her eyes with the corner of her apron and pretend she had dust in them. At last, Lucian lifted the key ring from the table, where it had been placed after the search of Vetch's office. Her keys, the old weight of duty. He held them out. "Miss Althorne, these were yours by service. They may be yours again by choice, if you wish it." Verity looked at the keys, then at the torn sleeve folded beside them. For years, she had thought being trusted with a house was the closest she would come to belonging. Now she saw the difference. Service given freely was honorable. Service demanded as erasure was not. She took the keys from his hand, feeling the familiar bite of metal against her palm. Then she placed them back in his. The room watched. "Let it watch, not as your servant," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "Not again." Lucian closed his fingers around the keys, as if accepting not rejection, but a sacred charge. "Then, as Miss Althorne," he said, "if you permit it, I would like the right to call on you properly." The drawing-room that had once made her stand accused now held its breath for an entirely different reason. Verity did not answer with tears. She had shed enough years inwardly. She gave him only the truth he had finally learned to ask for. "You may ask again when my father's name is cleared beyond this room." Lucian bowed. "Then I will spend every hour until then making certain it is." And for the first time since blood had marked her sleeve, Verity felt the future open without asking her to disappear. 3 months after the trustees signed Thomas Althorne's name clean again, Harrowden Hall opened its front doors to receive his daughter as Duchess of Westmere. The morning was bright with early autumn, the kind of gold that turned the Yorkshire fields honest and made even the old stone appear less severe. Verity sat in the carriage beside Lucian with her, gloved hands folded over a gown of deep green silk, plain in line, beautiful in movement, and chosen because she had refused every gown that made her look like someone being decorated into silence. The chapel wedding had taken place that morning at the small parish church beyond the park gates, with Mrs. Hensley as witness, Mrs. Vale in the second pew, pretending not to cry, and Annie holding a basket of late roses as if entrusted with state jewels. No great London crush had been invited. No crowd had been gathered to applaud a scandal remade as romance. Verity had wanted vows spoken, where her father's corrected name now lay in the parish register, written in Mr. Anstruther's careful hand beneath a formal note clearing him of wrongdoing. Lucian had agreed before she finished asking. He had spent the months of their courtship proving that agreement could be a form of devotion. He had called properly at Mrs. Hensley's cottage. He had written letters even when a ride of half a mile might have served. He had asked, never assumed. He had waited after every difficult question long enough for her answer to be hers. The first time he had asked for her hand, Verity had said, "Ask me when my father can hear it without shame." He had not pressed. He had gone instead to the trustees, to the parish, to York, to every office where paper could still injure the dead, and he had made the correction public enough that no whisper could pretend not to know. Only then had he returned with no ring in his hand, only his hat held too tightly and his pride set aside. "Miss Althorne," he had said in Mrs. Hensley's parlour, with the old widow knitting 3 feet away. "I love you. I don't love you because I found you wounded. I love you because even wounded, you stood for truth better than I stood for comfort. If you don't want my name, I will still spend my life honouring yours." That was when she had said yes. Now the carriage rolled beneath the portico, where she had once arrived as witness, then as suspect, then as servant. The footmen stood ready. Their liveries were newly brushed, their wages restored, their eyes bright with restrained emotion. Lucian stepped down first and turned back to her, offering his hand not as a rescue, but as a welcome. Verity placed her fingers in his. The moment she descended, the line of servants bowed, curtsied, not with the stiff obedience of fear, but with the trembling pride of people who had seen a house learn justice and knew the lesson had cost something. Mrs. Vale stood at the front, dressed in black silk for the occasion, her cap so white it looked newly fallen from heaven. Annie stood behind her, older in the face than she had been 3 months earlier, but steadier too. Cook had emerged from below stairs, despite claiming she would never abandon a kitchen on a wedding day. Not even for the Queen. Verity looked at them all and felt the old weight of keys at her waist, though she no longer carried them there. "Your Grace," Mrs. Vale said, and her voice nearly failed on the title. Verity took both of the older woman's hands. "Mrs. Vale, if you curtsy too deeply, I shall suspect you of mockery." Mrs. Vale sniffed. "Don't tempt me, Your Grace. I've waited years to see this house corrected." A small laugh moved through the servants, soft and quickly contained. Lucian heard it and did not silence it. That, too, was change. "You will find wages entered in the new books today," he said to them. "Every arrear has been paid. Every servant dismissed under Mr. Vetch's false records has received a written character and compensation. No man or woman in this household will again be deprived of pay without my knowledge and the housekeeper's countersignature." He paused, then looked at Mrs. Vale. "Your countersignature, Mrs. Vale." The old woman straightened as if the words had placed a mantle on her shoulders. "Yes, Your Grace." Verity saw Annie wipe her eyes with the edge of her glove and pretend she had not. Beyond the servants, several local gentry had gathered in the hall by invitation. Not enough to turn the homecoming into spectacle, enough to make recognition public. Mrs. Bellamy was there with her husband. 2 trustees stood near the stair. Even Lady Maud's aunt had sent a card of stiff congratulations, which Lucian had placed unanswered beneath a paperweight until Verity laughed and told him forgiveness was not required for every envelope that entered a house. Lady Octavia was gone to Bath, under a reduced allowance and a watchful companion selected by Mr. Anstruther. Mr. Vetch had answered before the justice of the peace, and then before a harsher court of county memory, where gentlemen stopped inviting him to dine and tradesmen demanded payment in advance. Consequence did not roar. It settled day by day, until those who had used respectability as a weapon discovered they had misplaced it. Verity walked through Harrowden's great hall slowly. The portraits still looked down. The marble still reflected the windows. The green baize door still stood where it had always stood, but it no longer seemed like the border between the seen and unseen. Lucian had ordered it repaired, not removed. "A house needs working doors," he had said when she asked. "It doesn't need walls that teach contempt." In the afternoon, after the wedding breakfast and the formal calls, when the gentry had gone and the servants had returned to their duties with lighter steps than usual, Lucian brought Verity to the blue drawing-room. The furniture had been rearranged since the inquiry. The chair where Lady Octavia once sat had been moved to a less commanding corner. The table where the torn sleeve had lain now held fresh flowers and a locked box of polished walnut. Lucian opened it and lifted out a linen packet. Verity knew it before he unfolded it. The torn sleeve lay inside, carefully cleaned, the fabric mended only enough to keep it from fraying. One faint mark remained near the seam. She touched it with one gloved finger. "You kept it. You chose not to erase it." "No." She looked at the small dark trace. "For a long time I thought the mark was proof of what had been done to me. And now—" She lifted the sleeve and carried it to the writing table where the Westmere keys rested in a shallow silver dish. Not at her waist, not hidden in a drawer. Shared, accounted for, governed by trust. She folded the sleeve beside them. "Now it is proof of the day." Silence failed. Lucian stood behind her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him, not close enough to crowd. Even as husband, he waited for invitation in the small ways that mattered most. Verity turned and placed her hand in his. "Does Harrowden feel strange?" he asked. She looked toward the windows, which stood open to the autumn air. From somewhere below stairs came Annie's laugh, quickly hushed, and then not hushed at all. A cart moved along the drive. The house breathed around them, no longer innocent, but honest enough to begin. "It does not feel like a prison," Verity said. "It feels like a house with its windows opened." Lucian raised her hand and pressed a restrained kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so proper that it made her smile and so tender that it made his eyes soften. "Then we shall keep them open." Verity looked once more at the torn sleeve beside the Westmere keys. She thought of her father's corrected name, of servants paid, of lies named, of a duke who had learned to ask before protecting, and of the invisible woman she had once been. That woman had not vanished. She had endured long enough to be seen. Outside, sunlight crossed the threshold of Harrowden Hall, touching stone, wood, glass, and the folded scrap of linen that had become not a wound, but a witness.